It is 6:30, guys, so I would like to call the January 8th Addison Central School District Board meeting to order. The current time is 6:30. Happy New Year and welcome everyone. So what I'd like to do is start by doing board introductions, and what I'll do is start with Brian.
Brian Bauer.
Ellen Whelan-Wiest.
Joanna Doria.
Steve Orzek.
Mary Heather Noble. Sophia Lawton.
Jamie McCallum. Jason Champ. Chip Malcolm.
Trisha Allen.
Tim Williams.
Barb Wilson.
Pat Carenti, Director of Finance and Operations.
And other admin in the room.
Nicole Carter, Assistant Superintendent, Equity and Student Services.
Emily Blistein, Director of Communications. Courtney Cron, Director of Teaching and Learning.
Excellent. Thank you so much. At this time, could you check to see if we have anyone attending via Zoom? We should. And there's one. Oh,
This is one.
yeah, Jen. Okay. So at this time, it is our customary time for public comment on agenda items. And this is the time where folks can make comment on items that are on the agenda only. And if you're interested in participating, please raise your hand in the room, and then we will offer those attending via Zoom to also participate. If you are going to make comments, I would request that you keep them to 3 minutes or less. Is there anyone that would like to make a public comment in the room? Okay. If not, is there anyone attending via Zoom? If so, raise your hand. Okay. Seeing none, we will continue on. It is time to approve the minutes of December 11th, and I would like a motion to approve the minutes for December 11th board meeting.
I'll make that motion. I'll
second. And seconded. Are there any questions, comments on the minutes?
I have one, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Chip.
I had thought one correction, I'm having a hard time finding it. It's when we were talking about the two companies that were going to look into the
The pre-approval.
the pre-approval, and I think you used the term McClellan rather than McIntyre. You used Bruce McClellan, yeah.
Yes.
And when it caught my eye, so it's a couple places there, so that was the only thing that your minutes are terrific and captures the meeting very well, thank you. But it's not Bruce McClellan.
Thank you.
Yeah, Bruce yeah, 2 times it's stated, it's under 2 on action for ESSER project contract recall. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Yes, Ellen.
On page 5, it almost read like maybe Mary Heather, there's just a missing end of a sentence in the middle. It's regarding Steve's comments on the Black Lives Matter flag, and it just sort of says thanked Elias for, and it doesn't finish. So I wasn't sure if it looks like there just might have been something that maybe got accidentally deleted, but I just wanted to flag that and agree that really comprehensive minutes, but that was one that stood out.
Oh, yeah, I see. Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other? Okay, so let's go ahead and vote on approving the minutes as slightly modified. All those in favor of approving the minutes, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
And we have Ellie now too. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, great. The minutes are approved. Thank you. Moving on, it's time to approve the ACSD bills. I'm going to turn it over to Chip.
Bills were read on the 26th of December. Jason and I read them. There's the general fund of $1,123,072.59. larger number than usual, made up of two major things, one of which was a $725,378 or so to Hannaford Career Center, presumably for the tuition over the year at some point, and a $142,000 to student transportation, again for transportation. So of that 1.1 million, almost 900,000 are those two things. The second is payroll of $966,338.54. Another payroll voucher of $181.93. And a third one for $155.82. I make a motion that we pay the bills as presented.
So, I'll second.
Great. Any questions, comments? Seeing none, then all those in favor of approving the bills as read by Chip Malcolm, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Any
Not to
abstentions?
oppose.
Yeah, we gotcha. Any abstentions? Okay, the bills have been approved. Moving right along, next on the agenda is the report of our student representatives. And I see that, I don't think Eddie is here yet, but Sophia, do you have anything you would like to?
These are actually Eddie's notes, but
Okay,
I have
cool.
them. So quarter 2 is coming to close. Just lots of class loads. And student council has established a student stakeholder group to better student perspectives on the functioning of the school. And there's search to make the group more diverse and reflective of the student identities across the school. And that would be it.
Okay, thank you so much. Any questions to Sophia? Awesome, thank you so much. At this time, I would like to welcome Dr. I'm going to kill your Batavish, thank you, from the Hannaford Career Center, and she's going to be providing us with their fiscal 25 budget presentation. So I turn it over to you.
Fantastic.
And we'll have Matt cue up your slides.
Places to be here.
Well, the owl kind of follows you.
Okay.
I'm going to set you up with your traveling road show.
There you go.
The right one?
Yep.
Can we make it a little smaller?
No, it's not fitting. Maybe the control minus, just to kind of make the whole thing go down a little bit.
There we go.
There you go. All right, we can make this work.
Thank you so much.
So just to start off, I'm Nicole McTavish. I'm the new superintendent / director at the Hannaford Center. I've been following in very big footsteps after Tim was here last year. I'm new to Vermont. I'm not new to education. I've been in education for over 25 years, mostly in the K-12 sphere. I was a superintendent and an assistant superintendent and curriculum director and worked mostly in regular K-12 for all my career until now. But CTE has always been my passion. It is like the sweet spot in education. It's my favorite piece of what we do, and I can't be more thrilled to be here and be working with the Hannaford Center. So walking into this, I'm learning the processes in Vermont and how we fund things and how things work. So this is my first roadshow. So give me some grace as I move through this, and I'm here also just to answer any questions. Because I didn't know who my audience totally is. Oops.
And give us a little grace as well.
Technology. It loves us. So if we go to the next slide, I'm not always sure who exactly is in the room and how experienced everyone is with the Hannaford Center. So I just wanted to kind of give a quick overview of the different programs that we offer. So these are all the programs which we are currently offering. And you will notice in your upcoming course description guide for the students in this district that we're also going to be trying to, depending on enrollment, we're going to be putting welding in this year, next year. And we're also going to put electrical and plumbing in next year by clear demand of student and community. So both of those, this is a preview. You're in the know now, Tricia. This is going to be our board meeting on Thursday. Anyway, so we're going to be putting those in the course description catalog. We think that those are going to be very popular with the students and also a huge need in Addison County. If you've had any effects from the floods, you've known how hard it is to find these professionals to come and help you when you need the help. So in addition to what you see on the screen, we're also going to be offering those offerings next year. So what I tried to do is kind of set this up as, okay, we'll hunt with it. So can you go down one slide? Did it? No, the other way. Boy, this didn't, I'm not sure why it didn't.
Oh,
Okay,
I think it
anyway,
just-
I'm just
yeah.
gonna narrate then.
We have it in front of
We
us.
have
We have it in front of us.
Yes, like
Yeah.
this.
All right.
Your circles are here.
Yeah,
Yeah,
all right.
we have it in
So we'll
front of
just
us.
ignore that and we'll go with what you've got. All right, so I wanted to kind of set the stage before we get into the money piece about how critical career technical education is across the United States, but really here in Vermont. By 2040, we know that in Vermont alone, we're going to need 10,000 additional people in the trades that we don't have currently in the pipeline and that we are hoping to be able to train both through our center and through centers across the state. We know that in Addison County right now, the unemployment rate is actually a little below 1.6%. So we do not currently have enough people going into the pipeline, especially in the trades, to replace those who are retiring. And we also know that the funding for CTE used to be largely funded by the federal government, but that has almost gone away. I can tell you that when I was a high school principal about 15 years ago, I actually received more in Perkins funds for my high school, just single high school, than I do for this entire district now. So the federal funding scenario has changed drastically over time. It's really now a local and statewide requirement for funding, which is unfortunate because we know how important it is in the US economy. But the good news about CTE is that we know that it really helps students. So students that are involved in CTE programs graduate across the United States at a rate of 93% compared to their regular peers who are not taking CTE courses who graduated about 80%. They know that a large part of that is because of the connections that students make with their peers, with the industry that they get on fire about taking, and with the instructors in those programs. So they're really a retention program as well as a training program for students. We also know that 91% of our high school students that leave us with 2 or 3 credits in career technical education actually go on to enroll in college, but most likely in the college where they earn those credits. So the programs that we have where students are accumulating Vermont credits at our community colleges and our colleges, that really works. Students go on to those schools. We also know that 94% of our grads either leave to go into post-secondary education or into the workforce where they've been trained. So this is a really effective and proactive approach to making sure that students have a go-on plan for post-secondary. Then when we look at Vermont in particular, we know that Vermont is an old state, right? We're the second highest median age. So we have a lot of people retiring out of the workforce or who are currently not in the workforce. Right now, 20% of the people in the state of Vermont are over 65. 35% are over the age of 54. So better than half of our state is at retirement age already, and we know that we need to backfill many of those jobs in the trades. The other really cool and exciting thing that you may not know about Vermont is we are a high-tech manufacturing hub. We are the highest percent of exports in the nation of high-tech manufacturing. And some of that is in our own backyard. Collins Aerospace, Mechanical Advantage, places like that are really putting forward things which are in high demand across the nation. So I wanted to also kind of give you just, the school board sometimes doesn't know how many of your students are currently taking classes at the Hannaford Center. So here's Middlebury, and then Virgins, Mount Abe, and then we actually are not the serving school district for Otter Valley, but if Otter Valley doesn't have a program, then their students are allowed to come here. So we do have some students opted in our diesel program that come here. But you can see the percentage of students that from the sending school district that actually come to the Hannaford Center. We have a really interesting and special relationship with Virgins, which is, I think, a big reason why their percentage is a little bit higher. Two of our teachers are actually embedded in Virgins. So many of the students take Virgins classes with a PAC teacher in their own high school. And that's been really beneficial, especially as students are just learning and in their pre-tech when they're young students and haven't yet sort of decided to specialize. So that's working well, and it may be something that we try to expand in the future to give more students opportunities. And this is the same data, just kind of looked at in a different way. Your total high school population, and then what number of students are actually taking at least one PAC course. The other piece, which is really good news for us right now, is even though we all know that we're struggling with enrollment across the state, our enrollment is actually doing well. Our students are continuing to see value in the programs and seek out the programs, and we're really hoping. My goal is that even if a student doesn't decide to become a completer, which means taking 2 full years of a course, that every student in all of our high schools have the opportunity to experience CTE at least once, to have that experience. Even if they don't end up going into that field, most of the things that we teach have everyday practical applications for your life. We also wanted to set the stage that we're not just coming to you to ask for tuition, we're also working really hard to go out and earn funds for ourselves the old-fashioned way through grants. Last year, we were successful. Tim actually led the way on this, earning $186,000 for an electrical vehicle grant, which is incorporated into our auto program right now. We also we have received a $100,000 grant already in partnership with Collins Aerospace for high-tech manufacturing, and we are in the final steps of earning a $550,000 grant that was teed up by Senator Leahy for our students in advanced high-tech manufacturing. We also do get about $120,000 each year from the Perkins, that's the federal funding that comes through. But the $100,000, the $550,000, and the $186,000, those are all competitive grants. Those processes are, as you can imagine, quite lengthy and take a lot of work, but the benefit for students is huge. So we're really excited about those. So then we get into, I just wanted to talk about, this is the current budget. So fiscal year 24. As you look at it, and board, you all know this, that salary and benefit is the vast majority, right, of everybody's budget. And for us, another huge piece is our debt service. So the Hannaford Center, you saw the remodel that happened over the course of the last year or so. And that building was built in 1971 and hadn't had any renovation since that time. So you can imagine 52 years, 20,000 students later, it was in pretty rough shape. And most of it was infrastructure. There really aren't any bells and whistles in the remodel that we did. It was HVAC, roofing, insulation, lighting, energy efficiency, asbestos abatement, all the things that you all deal with all of the time. But it was a pretty much top to bottom cleanup of the building to make it safe, to make it habitable, and to make it clean for students. But off the top of every year now, we have 18%, right, that comes right off the top for debt service, and that will be longer than we're all here, that we're paying off that bond. But it was the right thing to do, and we very much appreciate the voters supporting on that. But it does really impact our budget. Then the other two pieces, obviously, are salaries and benefits. So that all accounts for 86% of the budget. So only 14% of our budget is actually what you would sort of call discretionary, but I'm not sure if heating and lights is that discretionary. You'll see the next slide is the fiscal year 25 budget, which is what we're about to talk about. So it's almost exactly the same, except for the things that they're changing, which you're all facing too, right? You're facing insurance rates going up. Your risk management rates are going up. You're looking at salary increases as you're bargaining. So those are all the things which are affecting our budget. So in this next budget, it's almost the same with 85% of our budget into salaries, benefits, and debt service. And this is at our hoped for outcome with negotiations. We are in the middle of them as you are, so this may change a little bit as negotiations goes forward. So next slide this is our again, negotiations are not complete, and we do not have all of our numbers, and we do not yet have enrollment numbers. So if nothing changed with enrollment and we settled somewhere near what we budgeted for, right, which we don't really know yet, this is what our preliminary tuition forecast would be. The interesting thing about CTE is that the cost for running it is pretty fixed. It's the number of students, which is the variable. So the more enrollment, the cheaper tuition. So it's a little counterintuitive as boards are sometimes thinking, oh, geez, we can't afford this. But you can send more and more and more students for the same cost. The tuition for each student goes down as the number of them goes up. So that's a really important piece to think about for CTE is the more kids, the cheaper it is for each kid. And so the biggest thing, same things are driving your increased costs, when almost all of your budget is salary and benefits, the dramatic increase of 16% in your healthcare premium throws everything out of whack. So for this, we have that coming up. And then we also have a really small staff, so every in is important, and we had a number of staff that previously didn't need healthcare that now do because of change in life circumstance. So when you only have 30-ish staff, 5 of them now getting healthcare makes a really big difference, which is something that happened with us too. And our VISBIT, our risk management, obviously risk management is a big thing when you've got machines that can maim and dismember people if they're not done correctly. So VISBIT's really important to us, and our insurance premiums are going up 9%. We also had a funding cliff because in the fiscal year 24 budget, there was a fund balance in the 23 budget, which then they used to offset some costs for the 24 budget. So y'all understand one-time money used for ongoing expenses ends up with a funding cliff the year after that. So that's another thing which is built into this budget, which is just part of life. So that all brings us to what our final preliminary budget is, depending on enrollment, which is coming up. We'll be getting our enrollment numbers in February, and then also depending on negotiations. Right now we're looking at about a 10-11% increase in overall budget. And then just closing out, we like to say that CTE is expensive, but it's worth it, right, for all the reasons that we said before. It really does make a difference in the lives of students. It keeps them in school. It keeps them connected. And our goal, obviously, is that students continue to go on to further education or workplace placement and then help the economy of Addison County. That's what we're here for. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, well, thank you for your presentation. So any questions? Jason?
Thank you, Nicole. That's great. What do you think the biggest barriers are for students taking advantage of the programs at the Career Center?
The number one barrier identified by kids is the schedule, is that the schedule that they have at their high school does not mesh well with the schedule that they have at the Hannaford Center. The number two barrier is English credit, that many, and I will tell you, I was really surprised by this, how many students end up having to drop a Hannaford class because they needed to take an English credit. And so one of the things that we're looking at, but I'm just in the preliminary stages of talking to all the high school principals. I don't want to impact high school English FTE at the high schools, but there's probably about 8 to 10 students this year that if I had some way to offer them an English credit at the center, they could have taken a CTE class. So I want to be very careful that I'm not impacting students taking high quality English at their sending school. But I think I do need some sort of pathway for when a kid has to choose one or the other, that I can help them out. So that's a conversation I'm just starting to have with the sending school, high school principals. Yeah.
Mary Heather?
I guess just to follow up on that, is that true for all of the sending schools or any of the sending schools in particular?
It seems to be all of them because we have lost students from all 3 of our sending schools in its English credit. I would have thought it was math, but it's not. It's English because it's the 4 years of English that's required. And especially that senior year when they're looking at graduation, sometimes they are like, uh-oh. Yeah, and I, again, the first choice is always for a student to take English at their regular high school. But if it's the difference between being able to do something which is going to give them a career pathway or not, I'd sure like to be able to offer a small subset of students an English credit. And we've been successful in a couple of cases. When we have a one-off student that is just a weird case, often we can negotiate something. For example, we were able to successfully offer English credit for our human services class this year for 2 students who really needed it because they did extra writing. But that wasn't a holistic approach to the other 8 kids that I really wanted to help. Yeah. Yes.
Jeff?
I go back when I was on the board in my previous time on the boards back in the 80s and 90s. The UD3 ran the Career Center until it separated into a separate district right around at the end of my time, 1999 or 98 or something. But in any case, I've seen, and I'm always happy to see the changes in the curriculum because times change.
Right.
And my son is a contractor. He did an engineer by background, but he spent time in the Career Center and the computer design courses in the old days. And I just pointed out because some of that stuff carries over, and when he got to college, he could teach the course to a lot of his compatriots that were taking it. So, but it's also important to look at whether it's the welding or whether it's the electric or whether it's the plumbing or all of those trades, which are really hard to find for contractors and for us as individuals who need to fix something. So thank you for doing that and being right up on it, because I think it's so important. I'm a little distressed, I guess, to hear how much the federal funding has disappeared. I guess I wasn't as aware of that as I used to be. But that's really a pretty heavy task for Vermont.
It is. In a bigger state with more tax base, it's
Right.
probably a less of a big deal, but it certainly is hard here.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to finally hear you and meet you,
Yes,
at
thank you.
least indirectly here.
Okay, we have Suzanne Buck. We're going to allow her to ask her question.
So, one's a question, one's a comment. Probably 10 or 15 years ago, the Career Center did allow students to get an English credit, depending on which career path they were involved with, because they did have an English teacher on staff and they did take an English class outside of their career path. So that was something that had been offered in the past, but went away, and I can't remember exactly why it went away, but it did. And, oh no, I forgot my other part that I was going to say. But, yeah, so the English, and it was actually English and math that students were able to take and get credit for from all 3 sending schools when they went to the Career Center. So that is something that hasn't happened. Oh, I know what I wanted to ask was, what is the status of the theater arts program? I know that nationally they were not willing to recognize that, and so that we had to look at creative ways to be able to keep that as part of the Career Center, as a Career Center offering.
Good question. Yeah, the theater class, so it had been struggling with enrollment, which this year actually our enrollment is pretty strong. I'm really proud of Eric and his outreach that he's been able, the instructor Eric St. John, he has 8, I believe it's 8 and 10 students in the 2 sections, which is in CTE world, 8 is the magic number, just so you know. And the piece that we still are working on is part of what you're required to do in CTE is have the option for students to earn college credits in your second year of the program. Right now, we're still struggling with a partner university. Eric has all the credentials he needs. He has his degree, and he has the ability to teach the course. It's finding somebody who will partner with us in order to offer those courses. So that is the work of this year. But the program itself is strong, and the enrollment is where it needs to be and continues to grow by word of mouth at this point. We haven't yet received the registrations, obviously, for the next school year, so I can't predict yet. But the students are very pleased with the program. The community seems very pleased with the program. The houses are packed. We sell out every show that we have. And all the information I have at this time tells me that I'm going to have strong enrollment again. But I do have to wait and see. Does that answer your question?
Yes, because we had been told previously, and I thought that had to be implemented by this past year, but maybe things have changed.
Steve?
I just wanted to point out that last year was a transitional year, and Dr. Williams did a fantastic job with that. But this is what we see a lot of, her professionalism and her grasp of the situation. And it's sometimes hard to remember that she's only been doing this since July. She has been, I just can't say enough good about what she's done over at the Career Center. And I really hope that we are able to support them fully. So.
It was not meant as a criticism.
Oh, no. I didn't take that.
Joanna?
I'm looking at the table that says total enrollment head count for MUHS 532. Just curious, is that enrollment, like the students are full-time Career Center students, or does that include like a high school student or an MUHS student taking like one class?
Sorry, good question. The 532 is how many students are at MUHS.
Oh, sorry, so 152.
152 is the head count.
Right.
So the number of students, not the FTE, because our students are mostly half-time.
Got it.
So we have
Okay.
152 children,
Got it.
which from your school, which would account for probably half that of FTE.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
And so it spans like one class versus
9th through 12th.
or like taking one welding class
Mm-hmm.
or participating full on in a program like a
Right.
okay.
And if a student happens to be taking 2 classes, they're still only counted once in a head count
Yeah.
number.
Okay. Okay.
Because we do have students who take 2 different things with us.
Thank you
Right.
for that clarity.
Yeah, great question.
Okay. Any other questions? Excellent. Thank you so very much for taking time out to present your budget to us. And as we're anxiously seeing those final numbers.
And we have negotiations, so I apologize. I would generally stay, but we're in the middle of negotiations right now. So
Yep.
we're going to go back to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as we transition, it's time for the report of the superintendent. So I'm going to turn it over to Tim. Dr. Williams, I'm so sorry.
Thank you very much. As was discussed in Dr. McTavish's presentation, scheduling can be a barrier to CTE, and Caitlin is in the process of trying to figure out a better way to do scheduling to make opportunities more available for students to be able to attend the Career Center. And we're talking about, I was just talking with her about this today. At the next board meeting, she'll probably give a presentation on what she's planning, trying to develop. So that'll be helpful. All right, we'll get back into the agenda here. There's an action item for hiring for appointments, and no resignations this time, just appointments. So I would ask that the board approve as listed on the agenda.
Okay, do I have a motion?
I move that we appoint the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 either hires or transfers that have been outlined in the agenda.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Discussion, questions?
These are mostly paraprofessionals. Where do we stand now? Because we were missing a lot of paraprofessionals. Are we still missing positions? Are we still missing?
There may be a couple of vacancies still, but the vast majority have been filled. At one point, we had a lot of vacancies,
Yeah.
and it's been a struggle, but it's getting a little bit better.
Okay,
That
Ellen.
was sort of my question, so I would just follow up and ask, I mean, I know you can't say exactly what might be making it easier, if it's easier. Has it just been a factor of time, or I know there was a salary increase or a pay increase that went on?
Yeah, I think that helped to attract, because frankly, people can make some decent money at other places for this kind of work. So we're now more competitive than we used to be.
Any other questions, comments? Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to approve the 5 positions as presented in board pack. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Okay. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the appointments have been approved.
Thank you very much. Every year you have to set a tuition rate. I'm going to turn it over to Matt to give you some details about that.
Thank you. Nothing to share on the screen here. As Dr. Williams just mentioned, we are statutorily obligated to set a tuition rate every year, or we default back to this year's tuition rate. Typically, there's 2 different things. There's announced tuition, which is the rate that we set, and then there's allowable tuition, which is at the end of the school year, the state crunches the numbers and decides what the allowable rate is based on the average of state data and you know what they decide a tuition spot should cost. So we just received the allowable in recently that helped us to sort of calibrate how we did relative to the rate that we set for last year. We do have the ability to sort of bill back, or we're obligated to pay any major discrepancies. And we found out that the delta between what we set as our tuition rate and what the allowable was a net gain of $479 for us. So we were calibrated just right on our tuition rate for last year, which gives us good optimism that this current rate is going to be a sound basis for next year. So we did include a 2.7% inflation factor, which is the CPI through I think through December of this year, an indicator that there is a little bit of inflation happening, but that it slowed way down from where we were at last year, which adds 2.7% to the rates that were allowable for this year. And those are the numbers that you have in front of you. Of $16,972 for elementary and $22,394 for secondary.
Okay. Can I have a motion first, and then
Yes.
we'll do the motion, and then we'll have discussion.
I'll second.
That's me.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, questions.
Suzanne seconded.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Steve.
When we do head counts for our long-term weighted, or whatever that, I've been calling it George because that's just way too hard.
Yes.
Instead of getting that for these students, this is the money we get for those students, because the head count goes to their original for the long-term weighted.
Correct.
Okay.
But special education costs in excess of these tuition rates are billable back to the sending district. So if we had a tuition student coming from White River Valley School District, they would be obligated to pay those special ed costs on behalf of that student. It's doesn't directly correlate to some of those extra weights, right? So ELL and FPL weight doesn't necessarily correlate to special ed billing, but that's kind of how the system's built right now.
But this is how we get the money for those additional students. Because
yes,
when we start looking at head counts and long-term weighted average, we don't get that for these guys, but we do get this money, so it's not a complete loss.
Right.
So.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So all those in favor of approving the elementary and the secondary tuition rates please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? The rates have been approved.
Okay, that's the first one. This year, we're also setting a tuition rate for the Addison County Special Education Collaborative, which is the collaborative between Mount Abe, Virgins, and ACSD that runs the ACP programs. So as the lead LEA on that collaborative, it falls to us to approve the submission of an ACP tuition rate on behalf of the collaborative. So the collaborative is governed by their own board, and the approval of that rate falls to that board. The approval of the submission of the rate falls to the ACSD board as the lead LEA. So that's sort of the maneuvering that leads to the motions at the bottom. A little bit about the tuition rate. This is designed to provide a per seat costs at the ACP program so that we sort of bake in the costs, all of the costs associated with a seat in the program to anyone who would be tuitioning in. So if a student from Lincoln, for instance, who was formerly a Mount Abe student, wanted to participate in an ACP seat, they would need to go to Mount Abe and become a tuition student to Mount Abe. But as we just saw, this is what you're going to get for the tuition bill. There's a big gap between what an ACP seat costs and what a tuition rate for an elementary or for a secondary student is. And this allows us to have that clear rate set so that we can adequately divide the cost of ACP by the enrollment.
Okay. So there's a suggested motion, approve the submission of the fiscal year 25 ACP tuition rate to the Vermont Agency of Education on behalf of the Addison County Special Education Collaborative. Can I have a motion?
So moved.
A second?
Second.
Discussion, questions? Joanna?
Matt, can you clarify that the total allowable projected cost is the same as the total estimated program cost? I guess I don't know what the word allowable in that means.
Total allowable projected costs.
Are you talking about the first page of this again?
No, the second one.
Oh, yes. So there are in ACP costs that are not allowable for tuition. So it can't be baked into this rate. I think transportation is the main one that they don't cover because I think, if I'm not mistaken, that would be covered in a different grant funding, and they want to keep those two things from double dipping. And so that's where the word allowable comes in there.
Okay.
There's a state worksheet where you walk through basically all of the costs and lines of cost associated with the program, and there were just a few that weren't allowable.
But they would be covered with another grant?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Suzanne?
So, have we always had to do this, Matt? Because I don't remember us setting a tuition rate before, or did Addison Northwest do it when they had the program management piece?
It's the first year that we've set a tuition rate for the program, and I think it was done in order to be out in front of sort of a shift in the program to be open to a broader audience of students, and to make sure that if students from out of the 3-district collaborative wanted to buy in, that we were properly set up to receive them with a announced tuition rate.
Okay.
But it is the first year that we've done that. You're right about that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Jamie?
Hi, thanks, Matt. Do we have 20 enrolled now?
20 is the enrollment that is supported by that program costs.
Okay,
So the max enrollment.
the maximum.
Yeah.
And so do you find that top number by just multiplying 43,638 by 20? Because it's different when I did it. It's not that different, but I'm just wondering like what the deal, is there some other, it's like almost the same, but I'm just curious, like if we don't have 20 people enrolled in it, this is just the maximum we can spend or something?
Yeah, I'm, off the top of my head, the math should work out, so if it doesn't, I
Okay.
have to go back.
I mean, I definitely
and make
didn't do it
sure
in my head, so.
but, yeah,
Okay. So basically, we have 20 FTE now.
No, the program's calibrated around a max enrollment of 20 FTEs.
Around the max.
So think of this, the tuition rate is a cost per seat.
There's a transposition of numbers.
Okay.
Should be 43,368. Good catch.
Yeah. Don't do it.
Somebody probably knocked on my door while I was. Thanks for catching that.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay,
Barb,
yes.
sorry, I feel like we should probably do an amended motion to correct that number. So I am going to make a motion to amend the figures in the original motion to set the recommended tuition rate per FTE of the ACP at $43,000, $368.
And Joanna seconds. So let's vote on that amended change first. Any comments, questions first? Okay, all those in favor of amending the tuition rate to be, now I got to remember it, $43,368, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? So that amendment passes. Now we can go and vote on the main motion, which is to approve the submission of the fiscal year 25 ACP tuition rate to the Vermont Agency of Education on behalf of the Addison County Special Education Collaborative with the new amount indicated. And we've already approved, have a motion on the floor. So all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, mathematicians.
Okay. And how are we doing on time?
We're okay.
Okay. Tier 1 curriculum overview. Courtney.
I have a handout. I think Emily is going to help me distribute it. It's a roadmap of sorts of the whole presentation, but you don't have to process it now to follow along if it's just creating too much chaos. Context for this presentation, I think the goal is to give an overview/refresher of what we've been up to with our Tier 1 curriculum. And to do that, I tried to put it in the context of where we were and where we want to go. So that's the format for this setup. And I'm going to try and keep this short. I recognize it's sandwiched between many other important presentations. And so to that end, I'm not going to pause and ask for questions until the end, but interrupt me if you have to. All right, Matt.
Good. Over there, scroll.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Oh,
The other
There we
way.
go.
thank you. Over here on the far side, we have state and local drivers that impact all of the work that's encapsulated in this slideshow, and really all of the work that the student services team and the teaching and learning team address every single day, day in and day out. Act 173, which is the act related to creating systems for students and supporting all students in an MTSS, and then our Vermont EQS standards, which I believe Tim linked in your Friday communication. Those two documents inform most everything you're going to see in this presentation, but three other important key supporting documents that we either are already or will in the future reference frequently are our newly adopted strategic plan, the state mandated CIP, Continuous Improvement Plan, which we will rewrite to align directly with the strategic plan, and then our NEASC IB self-study work. So that column is just letting you know what are the things driving this work. And then Act 173 has 4 main pillars, 3 of which are here in these 3 columns. So there's coordinated curriculum, a comprehensive local assessment system, and then needs-based PD. The 4th pillar is an educational support team, or EST, which I'm not going to get into tonight because the purpose of this presentation is really what is the level or layer 1 universal curriculum we're offering all of our kids that because of that allows us to make the moves instructionally that we want to make at tier 2 and tier 3. So I'm leaving ESTs, which really get us into tier 2 territory, out of this presentation. Next. So a coordinated curriculum as defined by the AOE is a common language that connects expectations and practices across all schools in a district. Students are exposed to the same standards, content, concepts, and skills across a grade level, regardless of classroom or content or context. And I want to say that a guaranteed viable curriculum, I think, is where ACSD is sort of hitting it out of the park. I think of all of the pillars, this is the one we've been working on the longest, even pre-Act 173. So my team unexpectedly is here, and I saw also on here virtually, and they have been working on this with teachers for a long time, and we're proud of the work. Robert Marzano is a leading educational researcher in the U.S., and his work shows that a guaranteed viable curriculum, what we say we can guarantee to all students at that tier 1 level, is the #1 school level factor impacting student achievement. And I'd say that we've taken that to the district level, which is uncommon, I think. So I have this then, now, next format. And as we get into the other pillars, I'm not going to read the whole slide to you, but I'll point out a couple key things. As far as our vertical and horizontal alignment are concerned, when I say then, I mean probably 10 years ago. We did have grade level alignment in pockets. Say a Mary Hogan kindergarten team might have been in alignment, or 2 math teachers at MUMS might have been in alignment. But within buildings and across buildings, we had no alignment, and we had students showing up at MUMS from 7 different elementary schools with 7 completely different curricular experiences. And we can say now that all grade level classes and subjects share common units. So every 7th grader or 6th grader who arrives at MUMS, at this point, we're getting close to, we'll have been through our whole, we call it program of inquiry, and we can say, here's what we offer 5th graders, 4th graders, 3rd graders, etc. in this district. Next, we just want to keep deepening that, and I'm going to come back to that in this presentation, but we feel like we've laid a groundwork that's been designed by ACSD teachers. Curriculum work's never done. We're in this reflective cycle forever. It's a good thing, it's really fun, and we're going to keep moving towards where we want to go. In our units of inquiry, I can't even say that pre-K through 10, we even always had units curricularly. When they did exist, I think they were very heavy on topics as opposed to concepts. Concepts are ideas that transfer across place and time. An example would be, say, a revolution. Instead of a unit on the American Revolution, students now might study revolutions in general. What are the causes and effects of a revolution? maybe some case studies of specific revolutions, a compare contrast. But the idea is that we're giving students ideas that transfer as opposed to things that they can access, for example, via ChatGPT. And there was no documented district-wide curriculum. We just didn't have that. We now base all of our units on backwards design. So our teachers say, where is it we want our students to be? And from there, in each unit, we design backwards, incorporating important concepts and skills. And we share these across grade levels. They're based on standards. And again, we want to continue to deepen that work. And I have some specific examples of what I mean by that in a couple more slides. I don't expect you to be able to read this. All it is a screenshot. I really wanted to try and find a way for each of these pillars to bring something to life to show you what I'm trying to talk about. And so if you go on the ACSD website, for each of our grade levels, this would continue down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it also has PKK. You can see our 6 units. The titles occur every year. So every year, K through 5, students will have a Sharing the Planet unit, but the content and the central idea and the concepts within that complexify and relate to standards as they move on. But you can go on our website right now and see this framework, which has been built by our teachers over the last 10 years and which continually gets revised. And then on the next slide, we have something similar for grades 6 through 10. And I would just stop and say, I meant to say this at the beginning, I keep saying 6 through 10 and not 11, 12. A lot of our 9th and 10th grade teachers are also 11th and 12th grade teachers because our school is not that big. But actually our Career Center presentation was the perfect segue into, once you hit 11th grade, there's so many flexible pathways and we want that for our kids that it's harder to say, oh, we have a guaranteed viable curriculum for 11th grade because you might be in 2 programs at the Career Center or in early college or taking courses online or taking diploma courses. So we want each of those pathways to be defined, but we can't guarantee what every 11th grader will get. So 6 through 10, this is just an example of, I think it's a 6th grade language and literature unit. For each grade level in each subject area, we have 8 subject areas. We can tell you what are our units, what's the title, what's the main inquiry of the unit, what are the skills that we want students working on in this unit, what are our summative assessments that are common that we say every student will take this assessment of this work. What's the content that ties to that? Because there is content and it is important. It's just more powerful to teach content through concepts. And then some sample inquiry questions. Our MYP curriculum, our goal is by the end of this year, and our MYP coordinators are working hard on this, is to have it published on the website. And actually in response to a community member who we agree with, felt like it was hard to get a hold of this. You had to email a teacher, and then we didn't have a common format to deliver it back in. So as each unit in each subject in each grade level, 6 through 10 is taught this year, they're reflecting on it, revising it, and putting it in this placeholder so that at the end of the year we can push play and it will be live on our website. And again, never done, but live at least. When I say we're working towards the future to deepen our work, this would be a visual of that. Last summer in what we call curriculum camp, all grade 5 or most grade 5 teachers came together and they worked for each of the units in 5th grade on identifying what is the vocabulary that we want all students to receive in this unit. We know based on Heather's leadership how important vocabulary is in literacy instruction. And so 5th grade teachers, this is 4 slides out of a large slide deck just for this unit. But for each unit, they have a slide deck of their common vocab, an example, a definition, etc. that any 5th grade teacher has access to as a resource. If you're a new 5th grade teacher in this district, this is a resource at your fingertips. Each grade level regularly will sit down before the teaching of a unit and work with our coordinators and their teacher leaders to say what's coming up, what are the big ideas, what are maybe the pacing requirements in this unit, what's the vocab, how does the math intersect, et cetera, et cetera. So here's an example of how we have our broad framework, but then we're working to deepen it and be more consistent at that like deeper level. That was coordinated curriculum in a really quick nutshell. So that was that second pillar at the beginning. And then the next one was comprehensive local assessment system. And this is really the state saying, we want you to gather data through a variety of ways so that you can look at it all together to drive instructional moves at the student and at the classroom level, but also programmatic moves. District-wide, what is your data telling you? And these are some of the types of assessments that we're working on and that the state has named. Formative and summative assessments happen within units, and teachers work on those together. And performance task is just a kind of assessment. It could be a formative or a summative assessment. But the idea is, and this is actually a focus area for us moving forward, is that our assessments have real-world relevance, they're hands-on, they're project-based. Not always, but in increasing amounts is what we're aiming for. And then screeners, we've implemented our FastBridge and our Panorama SEL screeners, which Nicole has spoken about in previous presentations. They let us look at the individual student level. They also let us look at a broader swath of data to make instructional moves. From screener data, we can zoom in on a student and do diagnostic work to figure out what are our next moves there for that student in that topic. That could happen in Tier 1, but it also happens in Tier 2. And same with progress monitoring. Based on the decisions you make from here, you're going to set up a progress monitoring cycle. We're trying to get better about doing that in Tier 1 and in the classroom, but also definitely in Tier 2. I won't read this whole slide, but I would just say then unit assessments and rubrics at the elementary level and the secondary level weren't aligned. It's really like whatever classroom you were in had their own rubric and assessment system. Now, at the elementary level, we have common rubrics for writing, and we have common rubrics and assessments for math. So obviously, we're still working in literacy, and we want to have common assessments in writing, and we've already looked at PD to get there. And then we just want to continue to develop and implement those because this is relatively new work for us right here. 10 years ago at the high school, we were not at all in line with state requirements around proficiency-based teaching and learning. We had a traditional assessment system still, and I would say in the last 7 years, we worked to bring in and align our proficiency-based assessment at the high school and to align it with MUMS. And then after we had that foundation in the last 2 years, those teachers have worked to design 11th and 12th grade assessment criteria and rubrics that they don't exactly mirror, but they match and align with our 6 through 10 assessment model. And we also have pre-K through 12 approaches to learning, which are our transferable skills. We have work to do there too in really defining what skills we're teaching where, for sure. But it's a strength of our system that the capacity's there. I think we just need time to hone in on that still. And we want to deepen all of this work. We've already said that next fall we want to go back to proficiency-based learning at the secondary level and ask, are we doing what we intend to be doing there? Our screener and benchmark assessments, I was out of this district for 1 year and came back, and Nicole's team, with members of the teaching and learning team, had built an entire common assessment schedule for math, ELA, and SEL screeners. We didn't have that at all. We had some math and ELA screeners for sure. At the elementary school, I think they were used consistently in some places. And at the secondary level, inconsistently, and we never looked at the data. So we collected it, but we weren't looking at it. And a huge next step, I would say probably for every district in this state, is using some kind of data warehouse. We've chosen EduClimber to consolidate all of this data so that we can use it in teacher level meetings, grade level meetings, and district level meetings. to identify our next steps. And that's huge that we're going to have this tool to help us do that. And then down here, diagnostic and progress monitoring. We have work to do here still, but we're definitely getting more consistent, I would say. Heather has really worked to develop diagnostic tools in literacy, and our elementary coordinators, Joy and Brandy, right now are exploring diagnostic math tools with Tracy Harrington, one of our special ed directors. So we're working on that. I think we can go to next.
Courtney, can I ask a question on that
Yeah.
last slide real quick? When
Yeah.
you mentioned transferable skills or the approaches to learning
Yeah.
as an area that we have some work to do, 2 questions. One, can you give an example or just sort of what are approaches to learning, just to sort of step back for a second, but then also when you say work to do, are you thinking like consistency in making sure that all 6th graders are getting the same access or quality of approaches to learning, or kind of what is more work to do?
So to answer the first part of your question, we have 5 big categories of approaches to learning. And I'm on the hot seat here, but some of these audience members can chime in if I'm getting them wrong. I think one of them is communication. Another one is research. Another one is social, which includes self-management. And
That's another one.
oh, that's another one. So social is more about not being social, which we're actually quite good at, I think, but collaboration and working with others and interfacing. Self-management is a 4th, and 5th is thinking, which includes critical and creative. And within those big 5 categories, there's like 178 discrete skills. But what's common is that we share them PK-12. And where I think we could do better is going back to that idea of backwards design. If we know that we want to get students to, actually Matt, if you do go ahead a slide, this picture was taken on the wall at Mom's last week. If we know we want to get all of our students to a place in 8th grade where they can fit all of these fish to scale on one poster in a group as a collaborative assessment, what are the discrete skills we're going to teach them that transcend sort of the math content? So probably some collaboration, because I don't know how many people are in this group, but their ideas, looks like 3, probably really varied about how to get there. You know, what is the critical or creative thinking they needed, and our teachers actually select what the skills are they're going to explicitly teach versus the skills they're going to implicitly embed because they've already been explicitly taught. I wouldn't say we currently have like a huge accurate chart that says in preschool we explicitly teach these, in kindergarten, 1st grade, but we want to get there. Does that answer?
Thank you.
We could go to the next slide. This is me just trying to show you that all of this work behind the scenes is coming to life, literally on our walls. This is a screenshot from a mom's newsletter 2 weeks ago. 6th graders are studying the wage gap in professional soccer teams and other populations as part of their math unit. And for their summative assessment, they had to research a profession of choice and then sort of look at the wage gap and analyze reasons for that gap, so on and so forth. So that's an example of a real-world performance task. That's what we want our kids doing in their learning. And then that last pillar, needs-based PD, all of that data should be driving what we're doing when we're doing professional learning. So our professional learning is based on what the data is saying about our need. The state says that needs-based PD happens when leadership ensures sufficient infrastructure for adult learning. Learning opportunities are selected based on the data. PD learning responds to current research, and then a mentoring program is offered to all new teachers. So that actually comes right out of the technical guidance for Act 173. And the then, now, next, at the elementary, grade level teachers 10 years ago didn't have structures for collaborating across schools. Now every grade level team collaborates across all 7 schools regularly with their teacher leaders and our coordinators setting like a really defined agenda. It's not just like a let's get together, Agendas at all levels, I think, used to be more logistical. What's our budget? Who are you? What do you like to teach about? I'm sort of hyperbolizing, but now we have very sacred time that is driven by very tight, well-organized agendas. At the secondary level, MOMS and MUHS meet as 6 through 10 departments, not monthly, but semi-regularly. So all science teachers from MOMS and MUHS, for example, will get together to align practices and curriculum. MUHS, I think, used to meet regularly as departments, but I think the work was, again, much more logistical in nature. It wasn't, let's open up our units and look at them. I think another big difference is that teachers have autonomy in their curriculum, but it has to be collaborative. So it maybe used to be the case that 3 10th grade teachers who had the same course by name did 3 totally different things in those classrooms. Whereas now, although they have autonomy, it has to be in agreement with each other. Our assessments are the same, the rubrics we're using are the same. We're not day-to-day in lockstep, but in general, we're taking kids to the same place. And they work closely in what's called collaboration time at the high school to calibrate that work and get on the same page, and that's not something that used to happen in ACSD. And frankly, I don't think does happen in a lot of high schools still. We have an annual PD calendar. It's built collaboratively with stakeholder input from a variety of places, but then we synthesize it all into a very long document that says what we're doing each month at various different meetings, and largely the special ed directors and the teaching and learning team are the people on the ground implementing that. We're rarely paying people to come in and run one-off PD. They're organizing it, implementing it, and bringing in the experts when they need to. And also at the elementary and secondary level team, we have a pedagogical leadership team that sort of responds to, I would say, qualitative data. And then we also have a district problem-solving team at each level that looks at more quantitative student data, all of the data that will sit in EduClimber soon, etc. And where do we want to go? We want to use EduClimber to move us forward. We want to reflect, revise, really engage in the action cycle, and continue to look for creative solutions, especially at the elementary level for collaboration. It's hard to get teachers together from 7 schools. Someone is always understandably out, or can't make it, or has a meeting, and then it's hard. So it's slow work. It's good work, but it's slow work. It's taken us a really long time to get here. And lastly, our mentoring. I think 10 years ago, we did have a mentoring system. Mentors reported out twice a year on kind of like the business with their mentee. We've tried to move to a hybrid model. We have a newly enhanced mentoring model, but it's optional. We have very few teachers participating in it. It's pretty comprehensive, but it requires a lot of their time, and they're new teachers and they've got a lot going on. So we've had less participation in that than we had hoped. But we do have Elizabeth Placencia working with the steering committee. Joy and Heather are both on our steering committee, Nicole, and they're working to see not only how can we further improve the model, but how can we get buy-in and incentivize it in such a way that people really want to participate in it, which I think will be the trickiest part. This is the last slide. These are all pictures from this year. Joy, Brandy, and Heather were invited to present at GIBS, the Guild of Ivy League Schools, in October in Connecticut. And the topic of their presentation was how we're using our program of inquiry. So that's those 6 units every year, pre-K through 5 or K through 5. How we're using them to embed literacy instruction. So they had educators from around New England and New York doing kernel sentences and doing a close reading of a text within one of the units. These were all other PYP educators trying to learn, and it was pretty much a packed room, from our team, how are you embedding that grain size of work in the bigger POI? And that at that point, they didn't even mention across all these schools. So that was cool. And then they were also invited to present in Falls Church, Virginia, to a conference of only public school districts that have the whole IB continuum. And the topic of that presentation was how they've used the POI to bring curricular consistency across 7 elementary schools. So also really neat. This is just collaboration in action. That was not best practices in teaching and learning, but that is our Tier 1 curriculum in a nutshell.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
This is
Well done.
really useful and it really helps. Are you seeing people kind of like, wow, this, I'm sure there was resistance maybe, because for getting people together, I got to take time out of my day, so on and so forth. But are you feeling kind of like people moving forward now? And
I think we're moving forward. I think we will always have pockets of resistance in everything we do. I think, like I said, it's really slow work, and it was hard 10 years ago to imagine we would ever be here. I remember sitting in a room with a former coordinator, Jessica Lynch, and just watching her try and puzzle over, like, how is this even going to be possible? So I think it's a lot of work, and there's such exciting momentum, and there's a lot to do.
Yes.
Which will always be true.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. Any questions? Steve, and then Mary Heather?
I had a quick observation and then a question. Although it's not highlighted through this, IB seems to be the backbone of what's going on here. I mean, how you do coordinated curriculum across the grades. People focus on the diploma program, that's part of it, but this, if we didn't have IB, we would have to do this some other way, and that's what you mean.
Which is being asked of every other school district, but I do think it's the reason, I hate to use the word ahead, because we're all just school districts trying to do our best, and we have huge areas of growth in other places, but I think it is what gave us sort of, to use your word, a backbone to build on. And it took us a while to figure out, like, how do we make this our own? And how do we contextualize it and own it and right-size it for who we are? But yes, and our diploma program is a flexible pathway that builds on this work should you choose to explore that pathway.
And the question that I had was, those teachers that have multi-age classrooms,
Yeah.
you said you have, this is for K, this is for 1, this is for 2. If you've got a K1, how does that get prioritized? How do those students get the same content? Do you understand my question?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
That's a good question. So our experts in this are sitting over there, and they're I think online, they're trying their hardest, and each year as we try and do this better and better, to say, first of all, if you are, just jump in if I'm doing this wrong, if you are a multi-age teacher, and we didn't used to do this, but now you're going to say which team you're aligning with for the year, so you're not hopping back and forth between teams. You have a team, and then you're going to teach the curriculum of that team. It is tricky, especially with Act 173 and MTSS. The more we get into Tier 2 and Tier 3 and diagnostic work and progress monitoring, we need to be able to say students have received our guaranteed viable curriculum. And the more grade levels you have, just the trickier that is. We have some master teachers in this district who know how to do it. But if you're a new teacher, or if you're a school where the combinations aren't predictable, some of our schools are really predictable, and therefore it's almost just like a loop, where if you're a K1 teacher, you know what curriculum you're looping and what team you're on every year. If you're a school where it's uncertain or they are getting fractured, there's a possibility that you're going to not have that whole scope and sequence, and that's hard, and every year we're getting better at trying to troubleshoot that, but it's also just a reality, I think, let alone a 3 grade level class. We pay our teachers more once they get to 3 grade levels. It's a line in the contract, and there's a reason. It's like a small stipend, but there's a reason for that. our math curriculum alone for each grade level is a ton of reading. So I hear. So multiply that by 3, and that's a lot of work for especially a new teacher.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mary Heather.
Yeah, I had the same question about just the collaboration, coordination among these 7 schools that have very different sort of classroom environments. So Steve kind of articulated that question more for me, but I guess I'm curious about the amount of work that has been done and needs to be done moving forward. Do you feel like the coordination kind of between school buildings is, kind of elementary to elementary, is where a lot of the effort has been placed versus the vertical alignment between elementary and secondaries? Or I'm just trying to get a sense of where the work has been really focused and what the need is now moving forward in terms of coordinating that curriculum to make sure that all of our incoming 6th graders are prepared, and that during their time at MUMS, when they get to the high school, they've all received that base tier 1. Is my question making sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think vertically in the sense of elementary school to middle school, that
or even
is,
grade to grade.
Yeah.
I guess I'm trying to, it seems to me that just from an outsider perspective, most of the work has been trying to pull up our elementary school curriculums together.
Yep.
So that there's much more consistency between buildings, and so that when the kids come to MUMS, there's not such disparity in their preparedness. It seems that's where we've spent the bulk of our effort, but that's my outsider perspective, not as an educator. So I'm just wondering if that's true, and how much effort has been or will continue to be spent on making sure that 3rd grade is preparing for 4th grade, and et cetera, et cetera.
I think one strength is that our coordinators at the elementary and secondary meet more than monthly. So they're meeting really regularly to have their eyes on the whole scope and sequence and to understand how the programs inform each other. I think at the elementary level, within grade level teams, we're strong, and I think again, our coordinators are split. So Joy and Brandy split. Joy has pre-K 1-2, Brandy has 3, 4, 5, and that represents a 0.5 FTE for each of them. And then they're also a 0.5 math lead learner, whereas Heather is sort of our lead learner in literacy for really all the grades. And I say that to say they have eyes on what the coordination is, and they're able to bring that information to grade level teams. We have teaching and learning guides that try to spell out what's happening where, a lot of documentation. So I think to every question you asked, we've made progress, and it's maintenance. It's not something, a strength, to go to Steve's question of the IB, is it's a sustainable model that when your superintendent changes over or your principal changes over, the work doesn't go with them. That's huge. Usually curriculum are built on one person's sort of vision. So we have that sustainability under us, which is strong, but it's not perfect. So I think we just have to keep working at it.
Okay, we have time, I think, for one more question, and Suzanne's hand's up, so.
So Courtney, this is great, and I'm glad to see the cross-pollination of work going on. And maybe I missed this. There was so much in those slides I was trying to read. I know you told us not to read, but I was trying to read. So we have the backbone of IB, but is there somewhere in all of this work where it shows how each step along the way we're working with the standards, so that the standards show a natural progression, say in writing or in reading, and then there's the IB framework. So is there somewhere where there's a
Nexus.
kind of a mishmash showing the two systems together so that we know we're working through the standards? I'm thinking like if a student came in from another school and who was an IB and it was more standards driven, how would they fit into an IB system? Does that make sense to you?
Total sense. So that, all, part of the requirement around schools and school districts naming their proficiencies, what are your sort of power standards that you want to focus on, has to do with the fact that in the Common Core, for example, there's more standards than there are days in the school year. So I think the state recognized, okay, we need to lump these standards into like topics, or we like to say power standards, so that we're not trying to teach each standard discretely, but we're teaching broad standards with many indicators underneath. To that end, I would say all of our units are built on the standards. The PYP was designed by taking, this is how we did it in ACSD. We took the NGSS, the science standards, and the C3 social studies standards, and we designed sort of the ideas and content of our units around those standards, and then tried to embed literacy and math where we could. Even though literacy and math are also still taught outside of the unit, we try and layer them in where they make sense. And that specific work, that layering in, an example of that would be the vocab slides I just showed. That's where we're trying to go next, is okay, we have this big broad framework, and how are we layering the standards in consistently within the standard grade bands. At the secondary level, each subject area has its own proficiencies or assessment criteria, and early on in the work we did a crosswalk. So we took, each subject has 4 assessment criteria. For example, language and literature has, I think, using text, or analyzing, organizing, producing text, and using language. So we took those 4 assessment criteria, and then we took the high school Common Core ELA standards and crosswalked them. Obviously something around citations or grammar would go under using language, but we need to return to that, and that's been a topic of conversation lately. We returned to it full force at the elementary level this year when we revised our progress reporting system, because we're wanting to report out on standards. So that group, led heavily by Christina in Weybridge and Tracy Harrington and Joy Dobson with some teachers, really took a really deep look at all of our standards at each grade level. And I think parents are very soon at this new conference that's in January. They're going to see a standards at a glance and a progress report that more actively ties directly to the standards. Sorry, there's a long answer. We're working on it, and we've got a lot of good work done. And if you come from another school, you're okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Look forward to hearing more in the future. We're actually pretty close to being on schedule. So next on our agenda is our state rep for most of us, or many of us in this room. Peter Conlon, he chairs the House Committee on Education, and he has stopped by this evening to be able to address some questions that we have around what we're all struggling for the budget, around the 5% tax rate increase, the 10% ed spending, the implications of what we do, how it has implications in the future, what happens if our negotiations, come in higher than what the approved budget ends up being that gets approved by the voters. What if ADM numbers are incorrect that we're being get? We got another set again today, so I know poor Matt is kind of frustrating because it's a moving target. So I'm going to turn it over to you and let you address, and then more questions can happen.
Thanks, Barb. Evening, everybody. It's nice to see many of you again, having spent many an hour with you in this room. I guess I suspect you have all heard from Matt and Superintendent about sort of everything that's going on in ed finance right now, from the pupil weighting law, which is Act 127, to the onboarding of the financing portion of Act 173, to all of those factors that you're facing at a local level with the end of ESSER and ARP money, inflation, healthcare benefits costing 16% more for next year, potential contract settlements that may be higher than previously has been traditional. I mean, it's a confluence of a lot of things going on that are really putting districts in a challenging place very much through no fault of their own. And yes, it's leading to a lot of confusion and questions and whatnot. So I guess, understanding that the law is happening, we can't control inflation, we can't control healthcare, we can't do a lot of things with the pressures that you're up against. I'm happy to take questions and do my best to answer them, but you probably know a lot of the answers that I'll try to give.
Go for it, Steve.
If I could, Peter and I had a long phone conversation, and we certainly can't go over everything that was there, but I did want to highlight some of the information that you shared with me.
And I'll try to correct some of the mistakes that I made.
Okay, because what we said at the time was, what I know now, this is what it looks like. I'm going to get more information, and I would like to talk to you about that. So, first of all, the CAP is encouraging districts to try to get to a new budget number by 2930. That's what the end point is.
The 5%.
Yes. Now that's the question. What will that number be based on? 5% over 24, or 5% a year from 24 to 29, or is it some other number?
Okay, it will. The understanding that I have is that it is based on the previous year's rate.
Yes.
So there isn't a cliff that you are always, as long as you're taking advantage of the 5% cap, it'll always be 5% of the previous rate. And then, of course, when the 5% leaves, it'll still be, your tax rate will be based on the previous year's tax rate. So, if you have an artificially low rate as a result of that, as you move from the 5th year to the 6th year, or whatever year you can transition off of that, that's probably when the pain inflection is.
Yeah. The other thing is, what happens to the 5% cap when too many districts qualify for it, because the education funding is a static pool?
Yeah. So that's a great question, and it's a question that a lot of people are asking. So if you think about the education fund, it's made up of revenue sources that we don't change, sales tax, rooms and meals tax, lottery, and then everything else is property tax. And of that, you've got your non-residential or non-homestead property tax, meaning commercial buildings, land, and apartment buildings, second homes, that sort of thing. And then you've got homestead property tax. So even the non-homestead property tax is generally, it's a statewide rate and is a sort of a figure that is somewhat static. And so then if that part that is making up the difference, the homestead property tax, has this, and everybody's taking advantage of the 5% rate, and it's a self-leveling fund, you can imagine it's like a dog chasing his tail and never catching it. So it requires an additional revenue source of some kind. Now, short of the legislature developing a new revenue source, the only other lever within the education fund is the non-homestead property tax. That can be adjusted sort of up or down by the legislature within the yield. When we calculate the yield, that's where the tool is. Now, if we have a lot of reserve that we can contribute toward buying down the rate, if we can find some other revenue source to devote to the education fund, that can also make a difference. But short of any of that, working within the system that we have today, I've asked the question many times to many people, and it is that the non-homestead property tax rate is really the only lever to be pulled.
So if we follow the rules and we stay under 9.9%, we can tell our taxpayers that their tax rate will be 5%, not 5%, and the state will come back and say, we didn't have enough money, so now it's 7%, or 9%, or 10%.
I would say that is a safe statement to make.
Okay, good.
And I would say you can say that too. That statement you can make to homestead property taxpayers.
Okay, that if we follow the rules.
I just gotta remember, this is all, everything we talk about is pre-application of the CLA.
Yes, CLA is a different lever, but our property tax, our base property tax, will be 5% if we stay within the guidelines.
For the homestead.
That is
the homestead, yes.
For that is the situation today.
Okay, thank you.
That is the situation that we would anticipate not changing on school boards at this late date.
Okay. Roughly how many districts does the legislature AOA anticipate will exceed the 5% threshold or the 10% threshold? Don't know.
Plenty.
So we're not alone in the pressure that we're under.
Plenty meaning?
A lot.
A lot.
I don't know the answer statistically. I think the anticipation is that, half, for sure. It's probably a safe.
Wow, really?
I mean, just to stay level funded.
But if you think, every other district is under the same pressure that you are. Some, in the winners and losers of Act 127, the pupil weighting, there's definitely been some shifting, but inflation, healthcare, end of our ESSER money, student needs haven't changed a lick. Everybody's under the same pressure.
And the last thing was, what about spending that exceeds the voter-approved budgets, such as salary contracts that come in higher or facilities, emergencies?
If you have not budgeted correctly for your anticipated expenses, you deficit spend.
Okay. And that's us, not the state.
That's right.
Okay. Thank you.
Any questions, Ellen?
First, I'm going to ask Matt, can you remind me, is it the long-term weighted average daily membership, is that affected by the census block? Is that
No, the
number?
census block grant is our special ed funding.
Oh, okay, never mind.
Under Act 173. Yeah.
It's different. That's a different question.
Jamie.
Thanks for coming.
Sure.
So, what you just said is interesting about the half possible number.
I made that up.
Yeah, you made that up, but
Strictly anecdotal.
but it's a lot, basically is what you said.
I believe
It seems like if one district does that, they have a problem. If a lot of districts do it, does the state have a problem? Like, is there a way in which, like, I understand that the law seems to suggest that if you play beyond the rules and you spend beyond your means, then you're knocked for it. Like, let's say, if your budget goes up sky high. Like, what if it goes up a little over 10% or whatever? Do you have any sense of what, we're planning so much around this, and it's hard to get a sense of what the real danger is of pushing the limit.
Yeah, so, and that's a great question, because I think the danger is that, and I think this is a very real possibility, is that if a higher than anticipated number of school districts take advantage of the 5% this year, we're going to revisit it for next year. So that, I think, is a safe thing to say, because it doesn't work if everybody's doing it.
Right.
And the purpose of the 5%, and when it was developed, because I was on the commission that studied this, no one anticipated this confluence of events that was coming together. It was at a time when budgets were going up, 4%, 3%. So it's a lot. So the idea is that you have this 5-year entry point for those, it was really designed for those districts who were having to adjust to the new weighting system, and that through that 5 years, adjustments in your own spending were to be made to account for this new reality. And if nobody does it, you're just going to, and we don't change it in the state, after that 5 years, it's going to hurt big time. So the hope is that everybody will adjust, but also, if everybody takes advantage of it, something's going to have to change. Because you can't put all that pressure either on a new revenue source or on one particular taxpayer in the property tax.
Ellen? And then, Mary Heather, I'm sorry, Mary Heather was next.
I guess I want to sort of clarify and follow up on Jamie's question, because he brings up a really valid point, right? Like, it's almost like everyone's set up for failure in this transition, right? And certainly the confluence of events was not something that could be totally predicted. On the other hand, the state has been, over a long time, trying to get a handle on the education spending. And so in some ways, I guess I'm just trying to clarify, like, you know, this circumstance we're in is not a one-time situation. It seems like a repeating broken record, in that the state is doing what it can to distribute education money appropriately. And obviously, this rule with 127, we're trying to get an on-ramp to make it reasonable for districts. But at the same time, the education spending in our state is kind of out of control. And so this idea that districts are feeling penalized because, you know, the budgets keep going up at a district level. I mean, I keep kind of coming back to this idea, and I mentioned it last time. I mean, in some ways, our districts are saying, like, well, turn up the heat, but, you know, not being willing to really take a look and, you know, put on a sweater and really look at the spending in each of our respective districts.
Right. I mean, we have this very unique system in Vermont that doesn't exist anywhere else, where the voters here, you all put out a proposal, the voters decide how much to spend. Our job at the legislature is to tax everybody enough to fund all of those local decisions. So everybody has limited control. I mean, you know, you are up against the things that you have no control over, like contracts and healthcare and inflation and all that. We don't control districts, what they choose to spend. We control the levers that we pull for how to raise the dollars. So who's ultimately responsible for controlling education spending? Well, I think, you know, at the state level, we're not ready yet to move beyond the local control system. So we put carrots in place more than sticks. And, you know, and the few sticks that we have out there, I mean, we're still responsible for making sure that we fund the budgets that voters decide to approve.
Okay, Ellen, and then I'm going to go to Suzanne.
I just want to check my understanding of this, because I do think that it's an important, as we're all talking about how to communicate a really complicated and difficult budget year publicly, this is a carrot and not a stick, right? This is the state incentivizing trying to manage increases in the budget and to not go above 10%. And it's actually really helpful, Peter, to hear that the thinking kind of predated the perfect storm of what all districts are facing, and, you know, nationally, right? Everyone's facing. And
I was going to say, you know, imagine if we didn't have the 5% cap in there.
Oh my
Right.
God.
You know.
Yeah.
Right, so what it does, it means that our tax rates would go to what the actual increase would demand. The state is creating a system by which would be painful. The state is creating an incentive to not spend above a certain increase percentage, so that then the tax rate only goes up a smaller amount. So I'm trying to make sure that that's accurate, because I think it's an important way of describing what this is. It feels like a penalty, but it's actually an incentive. And then the other side of it is a confluence of forces outside of, you know, any districts. And I think a huge part of it is the ESSER funding, and the recognition that ESSER funding actually allowed for staffing and resources that were probably always essential and have never been more essential, and that's also where the belt tightening gets especially uncomfortable. So it's not the single factor, but it's a really important one that I think we all have to, you know, the state is facing that dilemma as much as anybody.
Which is the 5% really wasn't meant to be an incentive. It was meant to soften the blow for
Right.
those districts impacted by pupil weighting negatively.
Yeah.
Over time to
Over
adjust
time,
to
to
what
adjust
that
their
will mean.
spending.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which we fall into.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, I think back, the first contract I negotiated when I was on the board, a family plan for healthcare, just as healthcare as one example, was I think $17,500. It's over $36,000 now for a family plan for health insurance.
Okay. Suzanne.
So, Peter, thanks for coming. Thanks for being willing to spend some time with us. So I have two questions. One, if every single district in the state went to 9.99% increase in their budgets, it's my understanding that there's not going to be enough money in the coffers to cover all of those increases, and then something drastic could happen. What drastic is, I don't really know. So I don't know if that's a correct perception, or if
Let me just correct a couple things. One is that it's a 5% where the tax rate, it's a tax rate increase that is being buffered. And then the 10% is in per pupil spending. And if you exceed that, you go before essentially a panel of your peers who just want to make sure you're not putting in AstroTurf fields with the money.
So my understanding is that the tax rate that we set, or that would be set, is for the district. And this is the other piece that we haven't really talked about as a board, but then the district tax rate then gets applied towards each of the sending towns. And so depending on where your CLA is,
Right.
your town could really see a huge increase in their taxes, even with the 5% cap, or not? Because I'm thinking of, so Bridgeport, yes, Bridgeport is now in their second year of reappraisal. All the reappraisal should be done, and people can come squawk to us listers in July about their new values. But currently, I think our CLA, I thought was like around 70%, which dropped from 79. You really want it to be up closer to 100. But there, the state also has to realize there's a minimum of 5-year waiting list to get on the, to get a reappraisal done. So you can't just say we want a reappraisal and do it. So how does that affect and roll into the CLA with that 5% cap, or does it not?
It doesn't. I mean, you folks operate on the pre-CLA side of things. And I just remind everybody, the CLA is a placeholder for a reappraisal, and it's to ensure that everybody's paying their fair share into the education fund. So if you're at 70%, that means you haven't done a reappraisal. Your grand list should be much higher than is listed. Cornwall is at 70%, so we're going to feel it big time. So.
Well, in towns that were close last year that were much higher, they really dropped. The whole, across the state. So, and so a lot of the towns, we were much higher. Shoreham, Middlebury was much higher. Now they're in the 80s and below. So it's the 5% is 5% plus.
It reflects the insanity of the real estate in Vermont.
Yep. Okay. Any other questions while we have Peter? I know we ran a little over, but this is important content.
I don't envy anybody's job. Our job is to fund what the voters here decide and what you put forth. Everybody recognizes that the potential for a very painful property tax increase is there, and we're going to all try to find a solution. We're counting on all of you to be as responsible as you can be in the face of a confluence of events that nobody knew would come together at the same time. And our job is to blunt the trauma of huge property tax increases using the levers that we have available. But there's just simply no question, as Mary Heather pointed out, the cost of educating students in Vermont, in the system that we have, is, expensive. It's what the voters have said they want. And so it's a little hard to make changes that might bring that, bend that cost curve.
I'm sorry, Barb, I have one last question.
Okay.
Do you, I know this is predicting the future, Peter, but if that non-homestead tax, it becomes the lever that needs to get pulled, is that something that has a lot of resistance? I mean, is that just sort of in the past, has that been something that people are like, no, 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 don't touch that button? Or
Traditionally, the way the education fund works in the yield is that you want the non-homestead, the homestead, and the homestead by income rates. So, you know, some people pay, they pay by income, not based on their income, not based on their property. You want all those rates to rise together equally. That's sort of the right way to do it. So to all of a sudden hit one category a lot harder than the other hasn't been done. I think, yes, there's probably resistance to it, you know, because apartment owners will pass that cost on to their renters. Renters tend to be the lowest income people in Vermont. You know, commercial owners, will pass that on to their tenants. You know, and so that means small businesses get hurt with the increased cost. I mean, you know, what's the least complaining group to go after? Second homeowners and vacant homeowners. To disaggregate them out is a complex, multi-year, difficult process to create some new category of property owner.
With that positive note, thank you.
I gotta say, you know, all we hear about the problems. It was great to hear Courtney talk about.
Wasn't that great?
The coordination. It's always been one of the proudest things that I think that this district has done while I was part of it, and that was making all of our schools talk to one another the way they do.
Yeah. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Peter.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
I've got a quick PowerPoint presentation for you to show Peter before you go, if you don't mind.
Ouch!
He's moving fast.
Under Washington.
So there might be some duplication of info in here, but I think it's good to go over it a second time, or third time, or however long it takes to let it sink in. Move this thing out of the way. Okay, so today we're looking at tax rates and COAs. Feel free to chime in with any questions. We're going to kind of touch on a lot of the topics that Peter just helped us out with. We'll go into some granular detail about the CLAs as they came out, the impact on town tax rates. We've also got
Let me try.
Sure. We're going to talk about Act 127. Look at some year-to-year comparison data. And as Barb said earlier, we've been seeing new data sets come out, you know, a couple times a week here from the AOE. So this data is actually obsolete as of a few hours ago, but we went up by one LTW ADM, so things moved in the right direction. We'll talk about the tax cap, and we'll break down that equalized district tax rate calculation and kind of unpack what that means. Look at sort of a graphic analysis of all the variables that go into that, and hopefully inform the board of some of the strategy in landing this budget where it comes in at, which is a 9.9% per pupil increase. This first slide is as ugly as it gets in terms of like just raw data, and I hate to do it, so this is the only spreadsheet on here with so much of it, but it really is designed to showcase the complexity of what goes into the LTW ADM calculation. So in this first part, this is our ADM comparison, FY23, FY24. How did we get those ADM numbers? Here are our grade levels. bringing us to a total 80M here. That's where you can see about a 1.6 decline in enrollment for between 24 and 23. If you take this ADM and this ADM, or so the current and previous year, and average them together, you get this 2-year average ADM. Also have to add in state place students at this level. They're not here, they are here. So that's a 2-year average plus state place student, and that becomes the enrollment basis for the state's calculation of LTW-ADM. Then we assign grade weight, which I can unpack more for you on the next slide, but grade weight's added, free or reduced lunch, or federal poverty line. You'll see both of those as the poverty measurement acronym. English language learners, and sparsity weight. All of those are applied, added up, and that gives us our LTW-ADM, which again has that 1.6% decline year to year. This was the previous chart that I had. I left it in here because it does just kind of summarize some of those weights. So for a pre-K student, we count the student in the head count that goes into the ADM, but for grade weight, we remove 0.54 of them because they are not a full-time student. And so they actually, in the, if you go back one slide, in this grade weight line are in there as a minus 0.54 instead of a positive 0.46. So that's one of the weird things about the pre-K kids. Go to the next one. 0.36 of additional weight for middle school, plus the head count. 0.39 of additional weight for high school, plus the head count. And then an additional 1.03 for federal poverty level. An additional 2.49 for English language learners. And we, in our sparsity bracket, get an additional 0.07 applied to the entire head count, which gets us there. How did we do year to year? Well, we just saw that 1.6 decline in enrollment. Same thing holds true with our year to year comparison on the weighted average daily membership. Of course, this wasn't in effect last year, and so this is extrapolated or converted from the equalized pupils that we did use before. Same decline though. If we look at our education spending, this is the dollars per pupil. So this is dollars that we spend per average daily member, and then per weighted average daily member. So again, this is going to show you sort of by enrollment and then by weighted enrollment, because there's a lot more pupils that we gain when we were looking at it weighted than unweighted. Here's the first time where we see that 9.9% increase year to year, which is an important number to remember as we move forward to the next slide. Okay. The next couple of slides all have similar versions of the same graph to sort of unpack this relationship between these four things. They're all color-coded throughout the rest of the presentation in the same format. But we'll talk about them here for a second. So, per pupil spending, that's that number that we just looked at, and I think we all have heard it enough times to remember that 9.9% is the cap on per pupil spending. After we pass that line, we have tax rate implications. And so anytime you see a blue line, that's our per pupil spending. That's a measure of what's going on with our budget plan, our spending plan. Where are we at there? Our spending threshold is a red line. That's usually going to be static, right? Like held in place at that 10% threshold. Once we pass that threshold, we have tax rate implications. So that's generally just a horizontal line that we're going to see. The capped tax rate is that 5% property tax cap that we are going to achieve as long as we stay below the 9.9% per pupil increase. The charts will show, the graphs will show what happens when we pass the red line with the blue line, what happens to that cap tax rate. Then the actual tax rate is the yellow line. That's going to track the impact that our per pupil spending would have on our actual tax rate, our actual district tax rate, if we didn't have the cap in place, and some of the implications of that over time. Okay. So here we go. And again, this is purposefully oversimplified so that we're just really trying to grasp the relationship. Budget spending is here. This is our 5% tax cap, 10% threshold, equal or actual tax rate, and here's our budget. So it's going to go up when it crosses the red line, or just before it crosses the red line of 10%, is where we are able to maintain that 5% property tax cap. As soon as we touch that red line, it jumps up, and it continues to track along this yellow line. Our equalized district tax rate would be the actual and not the capped anymore at this point.
Matt, sorry, I know this is really small percentages, but it just feels like in the situation we're in, I just want to make sure I understand. So we need to hit 9.9. If we hit 10%, it's not saying at 10 or lower. It's
10 or above.
10 or above.
Yeah.
Ten's trigger, and then it goes
Mark,
up to the
thank you
yellow
for
line.
helping clarify that, because it was one of those things where you
The
can shave a 100th of a percentage point off pretty easily, but it's important that we do that.
Yeah.
Okay, we go to next. As I just said, as budget spending growth passes that threshold, we lose that property tax cap. And the EDTR, which is, again, that acronym that we're going to keep using for Equalized District Tax Rate, that's the pre-CLA tax rate. Doesn't have anything to do with the towns, it's just what our budget generates. That's the one that we have control over. That's going to revert to the actual rate increase of 20 to 30%. Why is this a range instead of a known number? Because you don't know what your spending is actually going to be. So as spending increases, that actual rate increases as well. We know right at this point where we come in at 9.9, this is about 22% actual tax rate increase. So that's what we're sort of protecting ourselves from by maintaining this 5% cap, is a 22% actual. All right, go next. So this is just another way of sort of thinking about what options we could have if we were to think about where on this chart we wanted to wind up, or we could potentially wind up with our spending plan. Option one, our new money, our budget is in excess of the 10% threshold. Our tax rate would jump to the actual tax rate again. That's where we're going to see things in the 20s or 30s for actual rates. Option two, this is the one that we're going with so far. New spending is held at 9.9%. And we maintain a 5% cap. That's going to also give us the opportunity to sort of maintain as many of those ESSER-related positions as possible, and the best chance at sort of year-to-year continuity for programming and educational product from where we are this year to where we hope to be next year. If we wanted to backwards, we could also say we're not going to spend any more money. We're going to keep the budget the same as it was in FY24 for FY25. In order to do that, we need to trim all the staff that ESSER provided. But we would also need to make additional cuts to offset those external drivers, right? Because there are things like healthcare which we don't have control over. And so if we said we want a flat year-to-year budget, then we would have to go find cuts to offset all of those external drivers. Thing is, we would still be capped at 5% because based off of the new weights and how things shake out, our budget for FY24 would already cost our voters 5% more. So we have a slightly diminished tax capacity, which means taking this year's budget and paying for it again next year would be a 5% charge to the taxpayers. So this is what we can get for the same price as this next year. Let's unpack a little bit of that upslope. What's driving the per pupil increase? Oops, sorry. No worries. So here are our budget drivers, which you'll remember from all of the previous presentations. We have some prices on here. Healthcare, that's our 16.4% addition to all healthcare lines. Wages, right now the budget's based around a 6% placeholder, even though negotiations are ongoing. That was baked in early on to make sure that we had money in the budget for negotiations. We have our ESSER positions, and here are the ones that have been funded in next year's budget, broken out by position. And then we have this other new money category, which is sort of a grab bag for everything else that's in there that represents new spending that wasn't part of the FY24 spending plan. This is that child care credit tax, our transportation contract increase, additional funding to support the price tag of the Mary Hogan ESSER-funded HVAC project and bring that to the finish line. We always budget a little bit for food service shortfall because federal grant funds cover most of the expenses associated with our food service, but it's always good to estimate that there will be a discrepancy between those grant funds and where we actually come in with spending. We have our contingency fund that is being raised to 1% from I think around 0.8%, just recalibrated. And then we have our career center tuition, which we just saw the presentation of, is high this year. And so that's another driver that needs to be in there as new money. Okay, so here's our, I'm going to pause for a second. We're going into the next bullet point from the first slide. Everybody with me?
I had a couple questions, Matt. One was middle school weighting. Does it match what we define as middle school, or is it a statewide definition of middle school that we don't align with?
I think it's aligned, yeah. I think it's 6, 7, 8.
6, 7, 8.
Yeah. I was curious about that too.
Yeah, no, I checked on that too.
I can't remember the question. Okay.
I know this is dry stuff, so thank you guys for sticking with me. EDTR calculation. So we have our per pupil ed spending divided by the tax commissioner's yield. That's what Peter just told us about. That when the tax commissioner is sitting down to figure out what the yield is, he's looking at the non-homestead, the homestead, and the income sensitized homestead tax rates, and trying to pick the yield that's going to balance all three of those rates appropriately. Smaller yield means a higher tax rate, and so this is a very small yield, but we also have a lot more equalized pupils this year. But again, here's how we get to our actual tax rate of $1.71 base tax rate. And that's that 22% increase that I was talking about on the previous slide. But since we are at a 9.9% per pupil spending increase, we get to stay at a 5% capped EDTR, which is $1.47 for the base rate. Here's a year-to-year. So our equalized district tax rate for FY24 was $1.40. We go 5% past that to $1.47 for this year. If we weren't to take advantage of the cap or didn't have the cap in place, it would be that 171. These last two lines just break it out by $100,000 of home value. So if you, for every $100,000 of home value with the cap, you're seeing an increase of $70. And that jumps to $310 if the cap were not there and we were still at that that actual rate of $1.71.
And Matt, one thing it's important for fiscal year 26, we're not changing, so we'll, even if we stayed flat with our spending, right, we would still then have to take advantage of that 5% cap to keep the tax rate, because it's going to work its way up to, I'm so sorry. I'll shut up. I'm sorry.
So what Doug was talking about was the tax cap, rightly so. It's really good. I got this idea from you, so. Sorry, so we're gonna walk through this 5-year plan, because that's what the state has given us, is 5 years. Okay, hit the next, this is animated. We're in FY '25, we're gonna take our spending up, right, to 10%. That spending increase creates that actual rate of 22% that we just saw, which, that could be a little lower, but imagine that somewhere in the 20s. And we're capped, okay? So that's FY '25. Go to the next. Now, next year, we have this shaded area because, you might notice, the red line has jumped up. We would get another 10% per pupil threshold next year for new spending. Okay, so we could spend more next year if we wanted to. This example is a flat budget example, so we're going to assume, we're going to look at what happens if we spend what we're planning to spend next year, but then don't increase the budget at all for 5 years. Okay, let's go to that. Might have to hit it a couple times because of the animation. So, one more. Okay, there we go. So spending has leveled out here. We went up to 10 or 9.9 and we stayed there for year 2. Okay? Taxes were capped at a 5% increase here. But in FY '26, our budget still costs 22% because it's the same year to year. And so what does the law say? The law says we're going to go up another 5 because this is still the actual. And they're allowed to go up 5%, no more than 5, because of the cap every year. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We got rid of the red line because it gets confusing after this, but this is the idea that that pattern, if we fix the budget, fix the spending at our FY '25 amount and carry that number forward all the way, and hit it one more time, to FY '29, every single year, we're chasing that rate that we've set forth in FY '25 because until the capped rate matches the actual rate, we'll continue to go up a measure of 5% a year with a fixed budget. So as long as spending is level, the capped rate will increase 5% a year until that green line touches the yellow line and the actual matches the capped rate. Okay? This is where it gets a little wonky because this is sort of, let me walk you through the example. FY '24, FY '25, so we have a spending increase here. We also have a spending increase to FY '26. We have 2 years of spending increases. Then we level out and we take a year off, level fund FY '27, level fund FY '28. Then we come back and we say we need more money, and we increase the budget again, a reasonable amount, not too much. Again, looks like we're probably still in that 10% per pupil threshold. In '29, and then we do that again in '30. Because we had never crossed the per pupil threshold of 9.9% in any of these years, all our cap tax rate's going to do is what it's meant to do, 5% annual growth, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. Then, I put year 4, but we're probably year 6. In year 6 is where the bill comes due, right? And if you have continued to tick this yellow line up, but your 5% per year annual tax rate growth has not kept pace with your spending, even if you did everything right and never passed the threshold, you still have this 10 to 30% tax bill that's going to come due at the end of this cycle. And that's the scary part in all this is, if we don't figure out a way, or if districts in Vermont don't figure out a way to equalize the actual and the capped rate within the next 5-year period, they're going to face this gulf, this cliff at the end of the period.
I'm sorry, I just want to I feel like this is a really important point that we need to underscore in our narrative, because I worry that the perception of the public, I think we have to be very careful when we communicate, that we're not communicating this as a one-year thing.
Right.
A one-year tough circumstance, but we're still going to do our best. Like, this is a 5-year plan, but even if we're not careful enough, at the end of that 5 years, our taxpayers could get their butts kicked. And I think we really need to be honest and transparent about that reality that we're facing as a district. I just really want to underscore that, and I'll shut up now.
So the good news is, well, not good news, but the reality is, you know, if you create a scenario where you have a budget that declines every year, and you figure out a way to find efficiency in your spending, and, you know, somehow manage costs so that you're, you know, able to budget less every year. What can you do? You can move up the date where that those 2 points, or the green and the yellow line, meet each other, and you can have sort of a sooner payoff so that you don't subject your taxpayers to 5, 5, 5, 5, 5 every year, and instead you meet them, you know, in FY26 with a budget that where the actual matches the capped rate, and you know, you're going to level off from there. So there's a way to do it where the tax rate does not continue to go up every single year of this 5-year period, but it would require a decline in budgeted spending.
Does anyone know when a budget has declined like this?
Never. Not with 16% increases in health costs.
Yeah, it's hard.
We have not, what we've dodged here is, by putting it at 10%, is we've mortgaged a 5% cliff.
Yep.
And if we don't make that up over the next 4 years, that 5% cliff is still out there. And if we add to that cliff, that's that gap, that's that growing gap. Every year we exceed 5%. We are creating a bigger cliff. By doing this, yes, we've succeeded this year. We've also mortgaged a 5% cliff that we now have to deal with for the next 4 years.
The way I was thinking of it is it kind of like starts a timer, right? Where next year we have a budget that maximizes bang for our buck, right? 5% property tax rate increase for 9.9% spending. That's as much bang for our buck as we can get. But it starts a timer where if we don't figure out how to make that enough within 5 years, and to say that growth needs to happen, or growth is almost frozen throughout that whole period, and that, you know, what we're getting next year needs to be the lines that we color in for the next half decade, then, you know, we face raising that yellow line and not being able to chase it down 5 years from now.
I just want to say, to the same point that Mary Heather made about not sort of painting too rosy a picture, this is also a rosy picture. These are lines on a graph that look like if we just decrease our budget, those are people. Decreasing our budget, 80% of our budget is salaries. Decreasing our budget by FY26 to achieve what looks neat and tidy, but there's a million, you know, like figuring that out. I don't want to act either cavalierly like this is all we need to do. So yes, like this year is colossally difficult. It absolutely means that we have even potentially bigger challenges to overcome next year and the year after. But this is also not just like the, again, neat and tidy solution of just decreasing our budget just enough so that we don't hit that cliff.
No, I mean, you're right. Like, there's like a tremendous amount of cuts that would need to go into getting that line to dip instead of go up.
Devastating cuts.
You know, which is,
And Suzanne, I think, has a question. Suzanne?
So, this brings me flashbacks of when we used to budget in Bridgeport, and you know, if we could go to 9.9%, we went to 9.899% and hoped that all of our numbers were right and so we wouldn't fall over. But if this is what the next 5 years is based off of. And we know that we're still in the middle of, well, just in the start of negotiations with teachers and staff. Should we really be budgeting a total budget at 9.9, not knowing where any of that's going to end up and or where the new negotiations for healthcare is going to end up? I'm trying to wrap my head around all of these numbers and knowing that we also need to add into this equation the facilities conversation. You know, can we afford to keep everything open and educate all of our students equitably, but still stay within this formula that the state has put out? Can we do that, or, you know, are we having to look at other things other than just staffing issues? Does that make sense to you, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're absolutely right. I think, you know, the state it's kind of the state's way, Peter, correct me if I'm wrong, but of saying, you know, you're getting $16,000 per pupil, like, that, figure it out, right? Like, that as the, that you, like, throwing money at the problem at some point becomes unsustainable, and, you know, there has to be, districts are going to have to take a hard look at, like, ways to bring costs under control and find efficiency and optimization of the resources that they have to do this kind of stuff, right? And, like, yeah, if healthcare goes up another 16% in a year where we say we can't afford to spend any more money, then that means that 16.4% is coming out of cuts to the programs and services that we already offer, because that's the only place the money is. And that's a really, it's not a rosy picture.
So, Matt, just a follow-up question. What happens if, say, in the spring / over the summer, anybody that we hire in, if they all decided to do, say, the family plan for healthcare, would that then push us into deficit spending? Say if we had, I don't know, 10 extra people that we had to hire and they all went with the family plan, could that push us into deficit spending? I mean, I've never done a budget where we've had a deficit spend, so just the thought of that scares the crap out.
Well, I mean, I think that we're properly calibrated for the healthcare increase that's coming down the line, and obviously when we're budgeting for healthcare, it's our best estimate based off of previous year's usage, current year's usage, and what we expect to see next year for plan usage. The idea that there would be a major change in plan usage that would increase spending there past what the budget is built for would be, I think, in the realm of, like, tolerable contingency and not at risk of breaking the budget. To run into deficit spending would be to blow through all of our contingency and cushion, and I think that the factors that could contribute to that, well, it might be a multi-factor, worst case scenario where it's a facilities and salary or wages confluence, or you have some of these two big things that both happen during the same year and stress out the contingency side of the budget. But healthcare in and of itself exceeding what the budget constraints are, I don't think would put us into the red.
Question?
Okay.
Brian?
Yes. Is the district paying the full amount of each individual's health care?
No. It's
What
20%.
percentage are we paying?
80% of the gold CDHP.
Okay, thank you.
And their premiums went up as well. I mean, the premiums that the teachers are paying, this were separate thing, they went up by that 16% as well.
Okay, let's go on to the next good news, which is CLAs. So CLAs are our conversion factor, and Peter, I think, did a really good job of introducing these tonight, but it's always good to dust off the old brand on CLAs. It's measuring the fluctuations in each town's property values. It results from an annual equalization study, which is done by the Vermont Department of Taxes, and it is the way to ensure that each town pays their fair share of taxes into the ed fund. In the most basic terms, it is a ratio of assessed value divided by market value. Okay? If we have assessed value of 1, market value of 1, the CLA will equal 1, and those two things will be in lockstep. That's telling us that what the sale prices of the home perfectly matches the assessed prices of the homes in that town. If we see our assessed value is greater than the market average, then our CLA is going to climb above 1, which happens, I think, sometimes, but would generally represent a town that's in some sort of economic downturn, or I think, and if anyone knows, correct me if I'm wrong, but if there's a major development and the amount of housing units in a town increases drastically, that would mean more taxpayers within that town, and therefore a smaller share for each person, and could drive the CLA up. What we're seeing statewide this year is the bottom one, where assessed is less than the market rate. This is the 3 years of property appreciation in Vermont coming due, or sort of showing itself here. We've seen, everyone's seen, the value of their homes go up tremendously over the last 3 years. The CLA represents the 3-year average and the home sale prices. And so that's why across the state we're seeing CLAs drastically beneath 1. Once they drop below 1, as Suzanne was saying, I think it's 0.8, that'll trigger a town reappraisal, but because of the backlog in that, it doesn't happen fast, and it certainly hasn't happened for any of our towns this year.
Actually, on the report, it said that 5 of our 7 towns are subject to mandatory reassessment.
Right, but I think, and what Suzanne was pointing out is that there's a 5-year wait list and something.
Yes, yes.
I hadn't heard that, that's crazy.
You're right, Matt, there's a long wait list. The time to do a town reassessment is typically 1 to 2 years to reassess every single property, and then to hold all of the hearings if people don't like their new tax assessments. So, Bridgeport is looking at a 2-week, we've been at it for a year and a half now, and hope to have it complete by July of 2024. So it's not a quick process, and there's only, well, I don't believe there's any firms in the state of Vermont that do it. There's 2, but they're out of state.
So we're going to be stuck with CLAs for a while here. And here are our CLAs. So we have a year-to-year comparison. These are the ones that are used this year, which again, they're staggered by 1 year. So we're using FY23 CLAs for FY24, and FY24 CLAs for the FY25 budget. You can see across the board, every town has dropped in CLA with a range of 8 to 18%. Cornwall and Bridgeport, I think, have the 2 most impacted rates this year. This takes those CLAs that we just had on the previous slide and projects them into a town tax rate. So again, this is our $1.47 that we got to from our 5% property tax increase, equalized district tax rate. Once we run it through the CLA, we're seeing some significant jumps. And here's the percent change year to year of those town tax rates ranging from 13 to 27% increase. So that last CLA slide does sort of culminate the discussion about how budget becomes EDTR, how EDTR becomes town tax rates, and all the prevailing factors around those things. I think it's important to remember that as we see a 27% projected tax rate increase in Cornwall, among a multitude of other towns going up too. What could we have done about that? Where does the school district factor in? Well, we generate the EDTR, and we generated an EDTR of plus 5%. To write a school budget that generated an EDTR of less than 5% would have meant in FY25 drastically reshaping and making sweeping cuts to our programming past just those ESSER funded positions, right? Those are the ones that kind of are front and center because that's like the grant funds moving in. But cutting every single ESSER position would not trim our budget past 5%. We would need to cut an additional $1 million or so. I'm not sure about the numbers, but tens of positions would need to be consolidated in order to get our EDTR to move lower than 5%. So, is there a way that it could have happened? Yes, but really the district's budget strategy of playing it, of trying to get everything in there that we can while playing it safe enough to maintain the safety of that 5% property tax cap rate, I think is the right strategy because it's going to maximize what we can get and what we have at our disposal to work with as we figure out what we're going to do for the next 5 years. It's going to be hard, but we're at least giving ourselves the best chance to take as many assets from this year into next and to figure out where we go from there. It doesn't do much to change the tax rates in each of our towns. But I guess the only way to summarize this is it's the flip side of being able to sell your house for what 2 or 3 times what you bought it for 5 years ago, is the tax rates are starting to go up and reflect that statewide or certainly district-wide appreciation in property value.
And if the EDTR was 1.71, right, instead of 1.47, these numbers, it'd be insane.
Yeah.
People would be seeing 30-40% in some cases.
Yeah, and when you start seeing tax rates that high, it doesn't feel like it's fair to the taxpayers to even put the school budget into that realm. Any questions? Oh, we do have a nice cheery slide to remind us that we have some things left to do to get this budget to the voters. The second meeting in January is where I'll do the full budget presentation, break down every cost center, hit the highlights for what's going on within each cost center. We'll have a draft of the budget book for you all to peruse electronically. And normally we would do a recommended motion to adopt, but in talking with Dr. Williams and Barb, there was some sentiment that it might behoove us to be cautious and schedule an emergency meeting, not an emergency meeting, a special meeting for later that week so that we're not trying to push a vote forward on the same day that we do the presentation. So, that's the asterisk there. We also, on the 12th of February, have our warnings. This is where we would give advance notice of our annual meeting, publish the budget book, and make it available to the public. And obviously, going in there would be some final updates based off of what goes on at the last steps of board approval and adoption. And then during our annual meeting, this is again where the full budget presentation happens, this time to the general public and perhaps with a stronger emphasis on the property tax implications, whereas the board will focus more on the cost centers and the content of the budget. we would print out some copies for the public at that meeting. And then 3.5 is where we have our budget vote at town meeting. Questions, concerns, comments?
Steve?
So about the capital bond that we've been talking
Or haven't been talking about.
it seems like this is an impossibility over the next 5 years.
That's,
As desperately as we need it,
I know.
it almost seems impossible.
Suzanne?
The only,
Suzanne?
So Matt, you have that the budget book will be available to the public on the 27th, the same day as their annual meeting. Is there any way that that can be available earlier so that they can come with questions and not be feeling like they're...
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, absolutely. I think this might be a little antiquated in the timeline language, but when we warn the meeting and publish the budget book, I think that's when it would probably go up electronically on website and wherever else it needs to be to get it in front of people. I think historically we have had hard copies available. We used to mail hard copies to everybody, and I think that just felt wrong. But we do sort of stick with tradition and have some hard copies available at the annual meeting. I think if people were interested in
I think on
advance notice,
we could probably have a few copies for people that aren't savvy online, that they can pick them up once we've warned them.
And we also used, at one point, we sent out postcards saying that the budget book was ready. If anybody wanted a copy, they could call in, email, and a book would be sent to them.
Yep, those postcards still go out.
Will not do things on computers.
Yep, those postcards go out on the 12th.
Chip.
just to comment on one of the things that Peter Conlon said, about if this law isn't going to work because no district can control their costs sufficient to come under it, then they ought to be looking at some change in it, whatever that is, okay? Which is a little uncomfortable too, because laws, you like consistency, but, there's just so many moving parts
Right.
for all of us that know anything, to try to get your hand around it.
Well, capital improvements is another one, right? Where the state knows that everyone is asking that exact same question that Steve just asked, which is, okay, so you made it impossible to spend any more money on the school budget. What about all this crumbling infrastructure?
Right.
I also think Peter said that the state's going to have to consider if every district does take advantage of the 5% cap. I mean, in either scenario, either that most districts exceed the 10% increase and can't take advantage of it, or the opposite, where most are aiming, they're trying to do what we're trying to do, which is land at 9.9. Either way, the state's going to have to look back at what it's, I mean, I'm not saying that's going to solve all our problems, but I think either scenario.
That's true, but we're on the negative side of this because of the way it comes out in the weighting. There's other districts that are much worse off than we are.
CV.
So, whether it's districts to the north in Chittenden County or whatever, they're facing exactly the same questions, but there's no way they're probably going to be able to be under that 10%. I wouldn't think.
Right, I think I've
So
heard from
it's both ways, but I think there's a number of them that it's going to be impossible, which means the rules and the law isn't going to work for whatever reason, either incentive or penalty.
So the thing I'll say about that is that there's this jury of your peers thing, the state review panel that the Secretary of Education puts together, and that he's in the process of putting together, or she is. It's 3 business managers and 3 superintendents, and they're figuring out what questions they're going to ask, what they're going to look at in a budget to make the determination of justified spending or not justified spending. I think that when they are looking at that, if you're a district who has no choice but to blow past that 10% threshold, because you just got whacked by all this 127 stuff, I think you'll expect to find sympathy in that panel and perhaps qualify for the exemption where you're allowed to keep the property tax cap even though your spending has gone past. I think they're going to try as hard as they can to make it as lean as possible so that it does get passed, but they are in a high-risk situation where their approved budget is going to have to be approved with this humongous asterisk to their voters that, oh, by the way, after you approve this, it might be this tax rate and it might be this tax rate. We have the opportunity to do, to not do that and to not put a maybe budget forward to our voters where it's maybe this but maybe that. And I think that because we are sort of in that safe zone, it makes the most sense to take advantage of that position and to not take on extra risk. But yeah, you're right. Some of those hard-hit districts are going to have to risk it in front of the state panel, I think.
Joanna?
This is nothing new. I feel like I have to say it out loud though, but it's so absurd, the 16.4 increase in healthcare. And so when you use the word enough, as our staffing enough, that's not even the question at all. We have to do with this, we're beholden to this, it's negotiated at the state level, and I know I'm not saying anything that anybody else is thinking, but they need to take it out of the education spending. I mean, it's absurd.
Yeah. After 13% last year, right? So it's like I'm waiting for the plateau.
Is there one?
Yeah, right. Where is it?
Yeah. So, good conversation, but I need to move us along at this point. We are running a bit behind. I'll try to catch up. No, it's not your fault. And thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Matt.
So, I'm going to try to minimize my report of the chair as much as possible. I do want to talk about budget outreach. As we've seen in the presentation here, I think it's going to be really important, first of all, to settle on the approach we're going to take, and then be in a position to put materials together to educate our constituents, because this is complicated stuff.
Yeah.
This is totally complicated stuff. I know the Communication Engagement Committee, they met and have kind of outlined a timeline, but the key is the Finance Committee, we need to really give them the details that they need over the by the end of the January, basically, so that they can pull something together.
Not the finance committee.
Did I say finance, or what did I say?
I think you said finance.
You meant communication.
No, the Finance Committee has to give the input.
Has to give
Has to give it to communities.
Yes, so that's going to need to be the emphasis, I think, of our next meeting. And, assuming that we're going with the strategy, the 9.9, strategy, I think now we can, really start to put that messaging together. So that's really what I wanted to mention here, and need people's support on doing that. The other thing, it's already in the materials. As much as I knew at the time on Friday, Dr. Baker's kind of monthly visits to ACSD, when she's going to be touching point in the district once a month. And just to remind folks, she's doing that on her dime. And I'm working with Emily to try to make it her day worthwhile, meeting with community members, that kind of thing. So that work is in progress. We'll hopefully over the next few days be able to figure that out for the next visit, which is the 25th or something like that in January. 23rd, thank you. Okay, moving forward, now for report of the board, we have 2 actions that are associated with the report of the board. Suzanne, did you want to say anything on these, or should we just take motions on them and move forward? What's your preference?
They were presented at the last meeting, and with a request that if anybody had, due to the lateness of the hour, if anybody had any questions or concerns, to send them on to Tim, and he would And I have not heard from Tim that he's received anything, so I'm presuming then that everyone is set and okay to approve them and written.
I have one question that's arisen since then, if I can just clarify, which is that someone had asked me if the policy committee was considering a parent engagement policy, and I wasn't sure if this, if the 823 community engagement and vision speaks to that, or if that resonates. And this doesn't need to be a discussion, if it's more than just a yes or no answer. I can talk to you offline, Suzanne, but I just wasn't sure if that was, someone saying parent engagement, thinking community engagement. Because I don't see anything in this policy that speaks to community engagement at all. It's all about vision. So I wasn't sure if there's another policy that's being considered about how parents can engage within schools.
Let's talk offline, because it's been a real busy week with everything going on, so I can't tell you off the top of my head if there is a policy coming down the line or if there is one current on that. So let me look and I'll get back to you.
Okay. Mary Heather?
Wouldn't parent engagement, plan, wouldn't that be done at the central office district level versus setting a vision for, establishing a parent engagement plan for schools? That seems like an operational thing.
Well, I think she said policy, but, right, you said
this
policy.
is where I'm a messenger. Someone said, is there a parent, they thought that there was a parent engagement policy under consideration in the policy committee. And I said, oh, I'll check. And then I read this and I was like, oh, is this what they were thinking of? And it doesn't read like it would be. So that's just why I asked.
Let's just give an action item back to the policy committee, and so we can move forward if that's okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So then I'd like a motion to approve policy 822, notice of non-discrimination.
So moved.
Mary Heather and Jamie seconded it. Discussion on that specific policy? Seeing none. All those in favor of approving policy 822, notice of non-discrimination, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? And Ellie, I assumed you were an aye. Okay, that policy passes. Next policy, approved policy 823, community engagement and vision. Can I have a motion for this policy?
So, motion to approve policy 823, community engagement and vision presented in board pack.
A second?
I'll second.
And that was Jason?
Yep.
Discussion. Seeing no discussion, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor of approving policy 823, community engagement and vision, indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That policy passes as well. And so at the next meeting, we'll have report out of all of our committees, like we normally do. For this particular one, it was just really action that needed to happen. Okay?
Does Dr. McTavish count for us? So Hannaford doesn't have to go next time.
Okay. So the next item on the agenda is public comment. I placed it here. We placed it here because we do have a plan to go into executive session. So that way that we can let folks go, while we're in executive session, and it's a little easier with the recording. So I see yes, I'm sorry.
Well, I have a comment or a concern, which is why I'm here this evening.
Okay.
I don't know if it's going to...
Can you state your name?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
My name is Dennis Michael. I live in Middlebury.
Okay.
Thank you. Is this where I chime in on what my concern is in the school system?
And any topic you can talk about.
Terrific.
Yes, you have 3 minutes, so.
Okay, I'm going to rush it in. I have 2 children in the school system, age 12 and 10. I'm retired from law enforcement from the state of Connecticut. The second half of my career was undercover narcotics, working with DEA and FBI. I have a 4-year-old that's going to be coming into the school system in the fall. So the concern for myself and others that I've spoken to, parents of children going to the Mary Hogan School, the Black Lives Matter flag flying under the American flag. Now, I said I'd probably talk to about 35, 40 people, which I'm feeling kind of lonely tonight because I'm here by myself and I don't see anybody else here. But our concern is, and I guess I could, well, sort of speak for them, I'll speak for myself. We don't feel that there's any race, creed, color, or religion that's one better than another. We feel that they're all equal under the American flag. Not sure why the preference of one flag flying, we just don't get the premise of why the Black Lives flag is flying when we're all created equal and all one in the United States of America. I guess that when I talk to those people and I ask, what would you like to see happen? And I don't think there's anyone that said differently. I think everyone said, have the flag not flying and have a flag that says all lives matter flying. Or just be considered all in one under the United States American flag. So that's my concern, and I guess I'm speaking for other people that I chatted with.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure, thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
And being in law enforcement, I don't know if I'm going to come to another meeting because I don't see any coffee and donuts in the law enforcement cherishes our coffee and donuts.
Oh dear.
Thanks for your time.
Thank
and
you.
Also, I want to say I've never been to a school board meeting before, and I am taken back and thoroughly impressed with the professionalism and the amount of work it takes to keep all of this going. I feel like I've been to the backstage scenes of what it takes for a rock concert to pull the concert off appropriately. And I'm thoroughly impressed. Thank you very much for all of what you do.
Thank you. Sure. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay. So at this point on our agenda, we have the superintendent transition framework. And in the board pack materials, there were two slides that I'd like to walk through. And I'm assuming folks have it on their, in their board packs, so we don't have to project something at this point in time. And then I want to present some additional ideas about what that would look like. And we would go into executive session because then, we need to talk about dollar amounts and days and that kind of thing. Okay? So looking at the why, basically we have a situation because we have hired Dr. Baker in December, right? That we have basically 6 months of time that we can take advantage of to really help transition her into our district prior to July 1st. And so what I've done is, spoken to Dr. Baker, I've spoken to Dr. Williams, and what we believe we could do here is that she would then have the ability to meet and work with the administration team and staff, focusing on forward planning, including the strategic plan implementation, August administration staff retreat planning. So this would all be forward-looking kind of work as opposed to the day-to-day operation. So there would be a period of time
several months where that would be her focus, and not to interfere with the day-to-day operation, to confuse people, that kind of thing, because that's what she's going to pick up when she comes July 1st. And when July 1st is here, a lot of people are on vacation, that kind of thing. So we would lose that whole month of July, basically. So this enables us to allow her to get involved. She is, this doesn't include the visit days that she has. Really the purpose there is, really, to be able to go and meet people and listen to people, this kind of thing, as opposed to sitting in a meeting, helping, oversee and work with the team on the strategic plan, that kind of thing. The other thing she would propose during that time would have some quality time to be able to meet one-on-one with each board member, attend board training as we would have it, be possibly involved in other board work as we see would be the need. And then towards the end of the plan, the last couple months would then start to work with Dr. Williams to transition the day-to-day superintendent operational responsibilities prior to July 1st. And so she would be in the district a bit more and really working to take over the work. So that comes to July 1st, she's really had her hands in it from an operational perspective. So I think the purpose, this plan would enable her to be involved in the forward thinking and strategic work that the administration will be engaged in for the next fiscal year. And as we can see with all the budget issues and everything, we need really all the creative minds to come together that we can. And will really result in less rework after July 1st, is from my perspective. The how, without numbers, if you look on the next slide, January through April, is the forward planning strategic work under the direction and leadership of Dr. Williams. She would be working with him. And we would do a daily compensation based on a reduced rate, not to exceed a total number of days. Okay, and that's what we would talk about later. So you can see the implications of doing that. Then May and June, as I said before, where she gets involved in operational work, decision making, and begin assuming responsibilities under the direction of Dr. Williams. Another compensation rate, because her role has kind of changed, but it still would be less than what she's going to end up with on July 1st. And it would be a not to exceed number of days. And the idea here is really taking advantage of the fact that we weren't able to staff positions. So there is monies that we could allocate towards this because of, staffing that didn't happen over the last year. That was part of the budget. Okay. So at this point, I would like to go into, yeah.
I was just going to move.
Yes.
That we go into executive session to discuss the details of Dr. Baker's transition training.
And Suzanne?
So I was just going to ask you to clarify is it just money issues that we're discussing? Because what's currently here can be discussed in open sessions.
Yeah, it's money. It's the money. It's really, moving us forward so that at the end of the day, I would like a dollar amount not to exceed, right, that I can take back to Tim and to Dr. Baker that we would have to agree to as a board. And that would be the action.
I just want to make sure that when we go into executive session that we're doing it correctly and not.
Yeah. If there's questions on the why and the how, I'm happy to take those now. And that's why I kind of split my slide deck up, to show the why and the now so everyone can participate and then go into executive session. Is there any questions? Any further discussion needed on the why and the how?
Before we enter executive session, just an anecdote
that
I thought you guys might enjoy. I was in a room of middle school girls doing a first aid course this past weekend. And on the plus side, they knew Dr. Baker's name as the new superintendent for ACSD. I was very impressed that that had stuck in their brains. And on the not as pro side, they were pretty sure she started work on January 1st.
At least they knew her name.
They knew her name,
Yay.
right? And so did explain that we are lucky that this gives us an opportunity to ease her in.
Yep, thank you.
Yep.
So with that, Mary Heather, I'm going to let you do the motion.
Yeah, motion to enter executive session to discuss the financial details to enable Dr. Baker's transition from work.
Okay, thank you. A second?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Suzanne. And at this time, we have to take a few-minute break.
You have to vote.
We have to.
I'm sorry. I'm trying to rush us. All those in favor of entering executive session indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, so we will enter executive session, but we do need to allow